My name is Clara Whitmore, and for most of my life, my family had a name for me that they never said directly. I was the difficult one. They never called me that to my face. Families rarely do. Instead, they choose words that sound softer. Sensitive. Complicated. Emotional. The one who always needed extra attention. My older sister, Elaine, was everything I supposedly wasn't. She was dependable, organized, calm under pressure. The daughter who remembered birthdays before anyone else did. The woman who could walk into a room full of problems and somehow leave with a list of solutions. If our mother needed help with a doctor's appointment, Elaine handled it. If the family had a disagreement, Elaine found the practical answer. If something went wrong, everyone knew who to call. And then there was me. Clara. The daughter people worried about. The daughter whose decisions were questioned. The daughter whose feelings were treated like evidence against her. For years, I wondered whether I had actually done something to deserve that reputation. Maybe I had been too emotional. Maybe I had made mistakes that were bigger than I remembered. Maybe Elaine really was the responsible daughter while I was the burden everyone had quietly agreed to carry. Then my mother died. And 3 weeks later, an attorney opened a sealed envelope in front of my entire family. What was inside did not just change the way I saw my sister. It changed the way I understood my entire childhood. My mother had left instructions that the letter could not be opened privately. It had to be read aloud. Both daughters had to be there. And everyone who heard it had to listen until the very end. No interruptions. No arguments. No explanations. Just the truth. The truth my mother had apparently been carrying for decades. And when the attorney finally began reading, I realized something that I had spent most of my life afraid to believe. I had never been the family problem. I had been the family story. And someone else had been writing it for me. My name is Clara Whitmore. This is what happened. And if you have ever felt like your family chose a version of you that wasn't real, I want you to stay with me. Because sometimes the most painful truth is not discovering that people misunderstood you. It's discovering who taught them to. My mother, Patricia Whitmore, was 74 when she died. She had spent most of her life in the same Massachusetts town where my sister and I had grown up. The house had belonged to our family for nearly 4 decades. It was not a mansion, but it was large enough to hold memories. Every Christmas had happened there. Every birthday. Every awkward family dinner. Every argument that ended with someone going upstairs and slamming a bedroom door. The walls had absorbed everything. My father, Richard, had died when I was still a little girl. I was 6. Elaine was 20. That age difference mattered more than I understood at the time. Elaine was already becoming an adult when I was learning how to understand death. She was away at college, building a life that was separate from the house. I stayed with my mother. So while Elaine experienced our father's death as a young woman who had already begun creating her own world, I experienced it as a child who still needed someone to tell me that everything would be okay. My mother did her best. I will always say that. She loved us. I never doubted that. But love and fairness are not always the same thing. My mother was grieving, frightened, and suddenly responsible for raising a young child alone. Elaine became the daughter who could help. I became the daughter who needed help. And somewhere in those years, without anyone announcing it, our roles became permanent. Elaine was the capable one. I was the fragile one. Elaine was the solution. I was the problem. At first, I didn't notice. Children don't understand family systems. They understand only what happens in front of them. I noticed that my mother called Elaine when she needed something. I noticed that Elaine's opinions carried weight. I noticed that when I became upset, someone eventually said, "That's just Clara." But I didn't understand what those words meant. Not then. I didn't understand that, "That's just Clara," could become a sentence that followed me into adulthood. My sister and I were 14 years apart. By the time I was old enough to remember her clearly, Elaine already had a life outside our home. She had friends, school, college applications, a boyfriend, plans. I had crayons on the kitchen table. I had homework. I had nightmares after our father died. I had a mother who was trying to be both parents at once. Elaine loved me. I believed that. But she didn't know me. Not really. And I didn't know her. That distinction became important much later. Because when people grow up in the same family, everyone assumes they share the same childhood. We don't. We share the same house. That's different. Elaine remembered our mother as someone who had survived. I remembered her as someone who was always afraid. Elaine remembered our father as a man who worked hard and loved his family. I remembered the sound of my mother's voice after the doctors told us he wasn't going to recover. Elaine saw a family that had been damaged by tragedy. I saw a family that had never recovered from it. Neither of us was completely wrong. But we were seeing different pieces of the same life. And my mother, without meaning to, became the bridge between those two versions. The problem was that bridges can carry people in both directions. And my mother was not always careful about what she carried. As I grew older, I became more independent. I was also more emotional. I questioned things. I asked why. I noticed when people said one thing and meant another. I could tell when my mother was unhappy even when she smiled. I could tell when Elaine was angry even when she said she wasn't. And I had a terrible habit of saying what everyone else preferred to leave unsaid. That made me difficult. At least, that's what I was told. When I was 16, I asked my mother why Elaine was allowed to make decisions about family matters without consulting me. My mother looked exhausted. Because Elaine is older, she said. That doesn't mean she's always right. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I had gone too far. Elaine was standing in the hallway. She had heard me. She didn't say anything. She simply looked at me. And that look stayed with me. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. The kind of disappointment that says, "There she goes again." I apologized. Not because I thought I was wrong. Because I wanted the room to become comfortable again. That became a pattern. I would say something. Someone would become uncomfortable. I would apologize. And everyone would return to normal. Except me. I would remember. By the time I was 21, the family had already decided who I was. The strange thing was that I didn't know how much the decision had spread. I thought Elaine and I simply had a difficult relationship. I didn't realize that my mother had been telling her stories about me. Not lies. That would have been easier. The stories were true. Just incomplete. If I had a bad month, my mother told Elaine. If I argued with her, Elaine heard about it. If I struggled with something, Elaine knew. But my mother rarely told Elaine when I succeeded. She didn't tell her about the clients I helped at work. She didn't tell her about the apartment I had managed to buy after years of saving. She didn't tell her that I had spent months volunteering at a community organization. She told Elaine about my problems. And over time, my problems became my identity. There was one period when I struggled badly. I was 21. I was depressed, although I didn't understand what was happening to me at first. I stopped sleeping properly. I couldn't concentrate. I withdrew from people. I was not functioning well. Eventually, I found a therapist who helped me understand what was happening. It took time, but I recovered. By my late 20s, I had built a stable life. I had a career I cared about. Friends who knew me well. People who trusted me. I had become, in every practical sense, a functioning adult. But my family had already formed its opinion. And opinions formed over decades do not disappear simply because the facts change. One evening, years later, I had dinner with Elaine. We were both adults. She had a husband, children, a successful career. I had my own life. But sitting across from her, I still felt like the younger sister who had to prove she wasn't about to cause trouble. We were talking about our mother. She had been worried about something. I don't remember exactly what. I remember Elaine saying, "Mom thinks you're under a lot of pressure." I looked at her. "Does she?" "Yes." "What did she tell you?" Elaine hesitated. That hesitation told me more than her answer. "Nothing important." "Elaine." She sighed. "She said you were having a hard time." "I am not." "I didn't say you were. But that's what you think." "Clara, you're doing it again." The words hit me harder than they should have. What am I doing? Making something bigger than it needs to be. I stared at her. And suddenly I understood. This was the role I had been given. Whatever happened, I was the one making it bigger. If I objected, I was emotional. If I withdrew, I was difficult. If I spoke up, I was escalating. If I stayed silent, I was distant. There was no version of me that could win. I went home that night and cried. Not because Elaine had been cruel. Because she hadn't been. She had been sincere. She believed what she was saying. And that was when I realized something terrifying. She wasn't reacting to me. She was reacting to the person she thought I was. And I had no idea who had created that person. For years, I tried to repair things. I invited Elaine to dinner. I called her. I suggested that we talk. Sometimes she agreed. Sometimes she didn't. Whenever I tried to discuss our relationship, the conversation seemed to collapse into the same conclusion. I was too focused on the past. I was too sensitive. I needed to let things go. So eventually, I did. Not emotionally. Practically. I stopped trying. I attended family gatherings. I called my mother on holidays. I sent gifts. I smiled. I behaved. But I stopped expecting to be understood. That was my solution. Distance. It wasn't dramatic. There was no final argument. No slammed door. No declaration that I was cutting anyone off. I simply became less available. And strangely, everyone seemed happier. That should have told me something. But at the time, I was tired. Then, in 2018, my mother became ill. The diagnosis was devastating. Cancer. Late stage. The doctors spoke carefully. They gave us possibilities instead of promises. My mother had 19 months. 19 months to say goodbye. 19 months to settle her affairs. 19 months to look back at a life that had suddenly acquired an expiration date. Elaine immediately became the organizer. Appointments. Medical paperwork. Insurance. Bills. Schedules. She was good at it. She always had been. I came home whenever I could. I sat with my mother. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. There were evenings when I would sit beside her bed and listen to the sound of her breathing. There were mornings when she was almost herself again. During those months, something changed. My mother began saying things she had never said before. Not everything. Not enough. But enough to make me wonder. One evening, I was sitting beside her in the living room. The television was on, but neither of us was watching. She looked at me. "Clara." "Yes. I know I haven't always understood you." I didn't answer. She looked away. "I know I've made mistakes." I swallowed. "You don't have to talk about that." "I do." "No, Mom." She shook her head. "Not tonight." I waited. Then she said, "But someday." I looked at her. "What does that mean?" She smiled sadly. "You'll know." I wanted to ask more. But I didn't. That was the problem with my mother. She could make a statement like that and somehow make silence feel like an answer. A few months later, she told me she had been writing. Writing what? She wouldn't say. I asked whether it was a journal. She said no. A letter. She smiled. Maybe. To me. Not exactly. Then who? She looked at me for a long time. To both of you. That answer frightened me. Elaine knows. Not yet. Why not? Because she doesn't need to know yet. That was the first time I wondered whether my mother knew exactly how complicated the relationship between her daughters had become. Maybe she had known all along. Maybe she had simply been afraid to admit it. Can I read it? When the time comes. What time? The right one. Mom. She reached for my hand. Trust me. I wanted to. I really did. But trust is difficult when the person asking for it has spent your entire life avoiding the truth. Still, I nodded. Okay. 3 months later, she died. The funeral was beautiful. I hate that word for funerals. Beautiful. There is nothing beautiful about standing beside a coffin and realizing that the person inside will never again call your name. But the service was peaceful. People spoke about my mother's kindness, her strength, her generosity, her ability to make people feel welcome. Elaine gave a speech. It was perfect. Of course it was. She talked about our mother's courage, about the family she had built, about the years after our father's death. I listened, and when Elaine finished, everyone cried. I cried too, but for a different reason. Because I was thinking about the woman my sister had known, and the woman I had known. They were both real, but they weren't the same. After the funeral, Elaine took control of the practical matters. I let her. She had always been better at them. Then the attorney contacted us. His name was Charles Reeves. He had handled my mother's legal affairs for decades. There's a matter we need to discuss, he told me. What kind of matter? I think it would be better if we discussed it at the family meeting. What family meeting? There was a pause. Your mother left instructions. What instructions? I cannot discuss the details until everyone is present. I felt a cold sensation move through me. Is it about the will? Partly. What's the other part? Another pause. A letter. I sat down. What letter? Your mother's instructions were very specific. What did she say? She said it was to be read aloud. To whom? Both daughters. I closed my eyes. Elaine knows. She knows there is a letter. Does she know what's in it? No. Do you? Yes. That answer made my heart pound. Then tell me. I cannot. Why? Because your mother explicitly instructed me not to. I almost laughed. Even in death, my mother was controlling the timing. Who will be there? Family members who wish to attend. Why? That is something you will understand when the letter is read. I hated that answer. But there was nothing I could do. The meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Those 3 weeks were unbearable. I tried to imagine what my mother had written. Maybe an apology. Maybe an explanation. Maybe something about our father. Maybe something about Elaine. Maybe something about me. The possibilities multiplied until I finally stopped trying to guess. Elaine suggested we meet at the old family house. The house she was inheriting. That was not a surprise. My mother had discussed it. Elaine would receive the house. The financial accounts would be divided equally. There were personal items designated for each of us. Everything was straightforward. Except for the letter. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early. The house smelled exactly as it always had. Furniture polish. Old books. Coffee. The faint scent of the flowers my mother had loved. For 1 second, I was 6 years old again. Then I remembered why I was there. Elaine arrived with her husband, Michael. Their children came too. Aunt Frances was there. So was Dorothy, my mother's oldest friend. Charles Reeves sat near the fireplace with a folder on his lap. The room was full. And I knew immediately that whatever my mother had written, it was not going to be private. I sat down. Elaine sat across from me. Our eyes met. Neither of us smiled. Charles began with the will. The house went to Elaine. The accounts were divided equally. The personal belongings were assigned as my mother had specified. No surprises. No arguments. Then Charles closed the will. He placed it on the table. And picked up another envelope. A sealed envelope. My heart started beating faster. Charles looked around the room. Patricia left very specific instructions regarding this letter. No one moved. She asked that I read it aloud. He looked at Elaine. Then at me. She also asked that nobody interrupt until the letter has been read in full. Elaine shifted in her chair. I felt my hands becoming cold. Charles opened the envelope. He removed several pages. And then he began. My daughters. If you are hearing this, then I am no longer there to explain myself. I wish I could say I planned this because I was brave. I did not. I planned it because I was afraid. I was afraid that if I tried to say these things while I was alive, I would once again find a way to soften them, to explain them, to manage everyone's feelings. I have spent most of my life managing. I managed grief. I managed fear. I managed my children. I managed the distance between two daughters who grew into very different women. And in doing so, I made mistakes that I cannot undo. The first truth I need to tell you is this. I was not fair to Clara. I stopped breathing. Across the room, Elaine went completely still. Charles continued. I told Elaine stories about Clara. Many of those stories were true. But they were incomplete. I told her when Clara struggled. I told her when Clara was angry. I told her when Clara made mistakes. I did not tell her enough about the times Clara succeeded. I did not tell her enough about the woman Clara became. I allowed a temporary period in Clara's life to become, in Elaine's mind, a permanent description of her character. That was my failure. Not Clara's. Mine. My eyes filled with tears. But I didn't look away. Charles continued reading. I want Elaine to understand something. Your sister was never as fragile as I made her sound. She was never as difficult as I described her. She was, however, more willing than either of us to question things that made me uncomfortable. And I mistook that discomfort for defiance. Clara saw things I did not want to see. She asked questions I did not want to answer. And sometimes, instead of answering her, I made her feel like the question itself was the problem. Someone behind me took a sharp breath. I didn't know who. Charles kept reading. I want to apologize to Clara. Not for loving you. I never failed to love you. I failed to see you clearly. And I failed to correct the story I had allowed others to believe about you. I looked at Elaine. She was staring at the floor. Charles turned the page. And I owe Elaine an apology too. Because I gave you a role. I made you the responsible daughter. The strong daughter. The one who could handle everything. I praised your competence so often that I failed to notice what it cost you. I allowed you to believe that being needed was the same as being loved. It is not. I know that now. Elaine's head lifted. For the first time, her eyes met mine. Charles continued. I created a family where one daughter carried the burden of being too much for funerals, and the other carried the burden of never being enough. There is nothing beautiful about standing beside a coffin and realizing that the person inside will never again call your name. I was maintaining the system, but the service was peaceful, and people spoke about my mother's kindness. I thought he had finished. Her generosity. Then he turned another page to make people feel welcome. Elaine gave you to know that I have watched the distance between you grow. Of course it was. I saw it. She talked about our mother's courage,
did not stop it.
About the family
Sometimes
she had
I
built,
even made it worse.
about the years
when
after
Clara
our
was
father's
struggling,
death.
I warned Elaine.
I listened. When Elaine
finished,
I told
everyone
Clara
cried.
that Elaine was simply
I cried
busy.
too.
I translated
for a
one
different
daughter
reason.
to the other. Because
And
I was
every
thinking
translation
about the woman my
changed the
sister
meaning.
had known. I convinced
And the
each
woman
of you that
I
the
had
other
known.
was less
They were
interested in you
both
than she
real,
really was.
but they weren't
that
the same.
is my greatest
After the funeral,
regret. Elaine
the
took
room
control
was
of the practical matters.
I could hear the
I
clock.
let her
Tick.
She had
tick,
always been better
tick.
at them. Charles
Then
looked
the attorney
down at the
contacted
page.
us.
His voice
His name
became
was
quieter.
Charles Reeves.
Clara,
He
you
had
once
handled
asked my
my
mother's
mother's
legal
legal
affairs
affairs
for
for
decades.
decades.
Everyone except
There's a
you.
matter we
I
need
told
to
you
discuss.
it was
He
because
told
you were
me.
difficult
What
to understand.
kind of matter?
That was not
I think
true.
it would be better
the
if
truth
we discussed
was that
it
I had
at the
given
family
Elaine
meeting.
the wrong map.
What
She was
family
navigating
meeting?
you with directions
There was
I
a
had
pause.
written.
Elaine,
Your mother
you once
left
asked me why
instructions.
Clara
always seemed
What
angry
instructions?
with you. I told you she
I
was
cannot
sensitive.
discuss the details
That was
until
not the
everyone
whole
is
truth
present.
either. The truth
I felt
was
a
that she
cold
was angry
sensation
because
move
she had
through
been
me.
trying for years
it
to be
about
known by
the will?
someone who had
Partly.
already been told who she
What's
was.
the other part?
I covered my
Another
mouth.
pause.
Elaine
A
began
letter.
to cry.
I sat
Not
down
quietly.
What letter?
Not gracefully.
Your mother's
She
instructions
cried
were
the way
very
people cry
specific.
when something inside
What
them
did
has
she
finally
say?
broken open.
She said it
Charles
was to be
continued.
read aloud.
I cannot
whom?
ask you to
Both
forgive me.
daughters.
I do
I
not
closed
deserve
my
to
eyes.
ask. But I
Elaine
can
knows.
ask you to
She
consider each
knows
other
there
again.
is a letter.
Not as
Does
the
she
women
know
I
what's
described
in it?
to you.
No.
As the women
Do
you
you
actually are.
Yes.
You may
That
never
answer
become
made
close.
my heart pound.
You may never
Then tell
repair
me.
everything.
I cannot.
But I hope,
Why?
for whatever years
Because
you have
your
left,
mother
that you stop
explicitly
fighting a war
instructed
that
me
began
not to.
before either
I
of you
almost
understood
laughed.
you were in it. Even in
Charles
death,
lowered
my mother
the letter.
was controlling
For
the
a
timing.
moment,
Nobody
who will
moved.
be there?
Then he
Family
continued
members
with
who
the
wish
final
to attend.
page. I loved you
Why?
both. That is
I loved
something
you
you will understand
imperfectly.
when the letter
I made
is read.
mistakes.
I am not
hated that
asking
answer.
you to forget them,
But there was
I
nothing
am asking you
could
to
do.
stop carrying
The
them
meeting
as
was
proof that
scheduled
one of you
for
was
3
right
weeks
and
later.
the other was wrong.
Those 3
you
weeks
were
were
both my
unbearable.
daughters. I
You
tried
were
to
both
imagine
hurt,
what my
and
mother
I was
had written.
responsible for
Maybe
more of that
an
hurt
apology
than I wanted to admit
maybe
while I
an
was alive.
explanation.
I am
Maybe
sorry.
something
Mom.
about our father.
Charles stopped.
Maybe something
The
about
room remained
Elaine.
silent.
Maybe something
No one
about
spoke.
me. The
And then I
possibilities
looked at
multiplied
Elaine.
until I
She was
finally
staring
stopped trying to
directly
get
at
me.
Her
Elaine
face was
suggested
wet
we
with
meet at the
tears.
old family
But
house.
there was something
the
else
house
in her
she was
expression.
inheriting, something
That
I
was
had never
not a
seen before.
surprise.
My mother
Recognition,
had discussed
not
it.
pity.
Elaine
not
would receive
concern.
the house.
Recognition.
The financial accounts
She
would be
finally
divided
saw me.
equally.
Not
There
the
were
Clara
personal
our
items
mother had
designated
described.
for each of us.
Not the difficult
Everything
daughter.
was straightforward,
Not the emotional
except
one.
for the
Me.
letter.
Just
on the day
me.
of the meeting,
And somehow,
I arrived
after
early.
all those years,
the house
that was
smelled
more
exactly
frightening
than
as
the
it
letter
always
itself
had.
Because
Furniture
once someone
polish,
finally sees you
old
clearly,
books,
there is nowhere
coffee,
left to hide.
the faint scent
Not even
of the
behind
flowers
the
my
story
mother
you
had
had
loved.
spent your whole
For
life
1 second,
believing.
I was
The meeting
6 years
ended
old again.
slowly.
Then I
People
remembered
stood.
why I was there.
Chairs moved.
Elaine arrived
Someone
with her husband
went into
Michael.
the kitchen.
Their children
Someone
came
offered
too.
coffee.
Aunt
All the
Frances
ordinary
was
motions
there.
people make
So was
when they
Dorothy,
don't know what
my
else to
mother's
do
oldest
after
friend.
something extraordinary
Charles
has happened.
Reeves sat near the
Elaine
fireplace
came
with a
toward
folder
me.
on his lap.
She stopped a
The
few
room
feet
was
away.
full.
I
And I
didn't
knew
know,
immediately
she
that
said.
whatever my
I
mother had
nodded.
written,
It was
I
not
know.
going to be private.
I didn't know she
I
had
sat
been telling
down.
me all
Elaine
those things.
sat across from
I
me.
looked at her.
Our eyes met.
She told you.
Neither of
Yes.
us smiled.
But not
Charles
everything.
began with the will.
Elaine
The
closed
house
her
went
eyes.
to Elaine.
No.
The accounts
I
were
waited.
divided equally.
She opened
The
them
personal
again.
belongings
I
were
think I
assigned
believed
as
her
my mother
because
had
I
specified.
needed to.
No
That surprised
surprises.
me.
No
Why?
arguments.
Because if you were the
Then
difficult
Charles
one,
closed
then I
the
didn't
will.
have to wonder
He
why
placed
I
it
was
on the
always
table
the responsible one.
and picked up another
I didn't
envelope.
know what to say.
A sealed
Elaine
envelope.
looked toward
My
the
heart
window.
started
I
beating
thought
faster.
I was helping Mom.
Charles looked around the
You
room.
were.
Patricia
Was
left
I?
very specific
Sometimes.
instructions
She
regarding
nodded.
this letter.
That's worse.
No one moved.
No. She
How
asked
isn't
that
it?
I read it aloud.
Because you didn't
He looked
know.
at Elaine.
I should have
then
asked.
at me. Yes.
She also asked
She
that
looked
nobody
at me.
interrupt
I
until
could
the
see
letter
how
has
badly
been read
she
in
wanted
full.
me to say it wasn't
Elaine
her fault.
shifted in her
but
chair.
I couldn't.
I felt
not
my hands
completely,
becoming cold.
because the letter
Charles
had not
opened
erased
the envelope.
30 years.
He removed
It had
several
only
pages,
explained them,
and then he
and
began.
Understanding is
My
not
daughters,
the same thing as
if you are
healing.
hearing this,
Clara,
then I am no
she
longer
whispered.
there to explain
Yes.
myself.
I think
I wish I
owe
could say
you
I
an
planned
apology
this because
I
I was
felt
brave.
something
I
inside
did
me
not.
tighten.
I planned it
probably
because
do.
I was afraid.
She gave a
I was
broken
afraid
little
that if I
laugh
tried
through
to
her
say these
tears.
things while I was
That's
alive,
very you.
I would once again
What
find a
is
way to soften
not
them,
making
to
it
explain
easy.
them,
I
to
almost
manage
smiled.
everyone's feelings.
Someone has
I
to
have
be
spent
difficult.
most of my
For
life
the first time in
managing.
years,
I
Elaine
managed
laughed.
grief,
A real
I
laugh.
managed fear,
Small.
I managed my
Uncertain.
children,
But real.
I managed the
And
distance
then we
between
both
two
started
daughters
crying.
who grew into very
Not
different
because
women.
everything
And
was
in doing
fixed.
so, I
It
made
wasn't.
mistakes that I
But
cannot
because
undo.
for the first time,
the
we were
first truth
standing in
I
the
need to
same
tell
room
you
without
is this.
pretending.
I
And
was
that
not
was
fair
a beginning.
to Clara.
Not
I
an
stopped
ending.
breathing.
A beginning.
Across the room,
6
Elaine
weeks later,
went completely
Elaine
still.
asked me to dinner.
Charles continued.
It was the first time
I
she had
told
invited
Elaine
me somewhere
stories
without
about
Clara.
our mother being involved.
Many of those stories
I almost
were true,
said no,
but they
then
were
I remembered
incomplete.
the letter.
I told
So
her
I
when
went.
Clara struggled.
We sat across from
I
each
told
other
her
at
when
a quiet
Clara was
restaurant
angry.
in Boston.
I told
For
her when
3
Clara
hours,
made
we
mistakes.
I did not
about
tell
the
her
will,
enough about the
not
times
about
Clara
the house,
succeeded.
not
I did
about
not
money,
tell her enough
about
us.
the woman Clara
She
became.
told me what she
I
had
allowed
believed.
a temporary period
I told
in Clara's
her what
life
had
to become
actually
in
happened.
Elaine's mind.
She
a permanent
described
description
events
of
from
her
her
character.
perspective.
That was
I
my
described
failure.
mine,
not
Sometimes
Clara's.
they matched.
Mine. Sometimes
My eyes
they
filled
didn't.
with tears.
Sometimes
but
we
I
disagreed
didn't look
completely.
away.
Charles
But neither of
continued
us walked
reading.
away.
I want
That was
Elaine
new.
to understand
She
something.
told me something
Your
I
sister
had
was
never known.
as fragile
When I
as
was
I made her
21,
sound.
during the period
She was
when I
never
had been
as
struggling,
difficult
our
as
mother
I
had
described
told
her.
Elaine she
She was,
worried
however,
that I might
more
never
willing
become
than
stable.
either of us to question
Elaine
things
had
that
believed
made me
it.
uncomfortable.
She had
and I
carried
mistook
that belief
that
for
discomfort
years.
for defiance.
I sat quietly.
Clara saw things
Then I said,
did not want to see.
I got better.
She asked
I
questions
know.
I did not
She
want
didn't
to answer.
tell you.
And
No.
sometimes, instead
Why?
of answering her,
I don't
I
know.
made her feel like
She
the question
should have.
itself was the problem.
Yes. There was
Someone
silence.
behind me took a sharp
Then Elaine
breath.
said,
I didn't
I thought
know
you
who.
were always
Charles
one bad
kept
decision
reading.
away from
I
falling
want to
apart.
apologize to
I
Clara.
looked at her.
Not for
And what
loving
do you think now?
I never failed
She
to
didn't
love you.
answer
I
immediately.
failed to see you
Then
clearly.
she said,
and I failed
I think
to
you
correct
were
the
one
story
person who
I had
needed
allowed
someone
others
to
to
stop
believe
assuming
about
the
you.
worst about you.
I looked at
That
Elaine.
sentence
She
stayed
was
with
staring
me
at the floor
because it was the
Charles
closest thing
turned
to an
the page,
apology I had
and I
ever
owe
wanted.
Elaine an apology
Over the next
too,
year,
because
more
I
pieces
gave you a role.
emerged.
I
Elaine
made you
told
the
me about
responsible
conversations
daughter
our mother
the
had
strong
with
daughter.
her.
One
The
was
one
about
who
a
could handle
disagreement I had
everything.
with Mom years
I praised your
earlier.
competence
My
so
mother
often
had
that I
described
failed
it as
to
another
notice what it
example
cost
of
you.
me
I allowed you
escalating
to
things.
believe that being needed
But Elaine
was the same
had
as
never
being
heard
loved.
my side.
It is
When
not.
I explained what
I
had
know
actually
that now.
happened,
Elaine's
looked
head
stunned.
lifted. You
For the
were
first
right.
time,
Her
I
eyes
wasn't
met mine.
completely
Charles
right. Continued.
But you weren't wrong.
Both can be true. She smiled sadly. That's something I never learned about you. No. I was taught that if you were upset, you must be wrong. I looked down at my coffee. And I was taught that if you were calm, you must be right. We both laughed. Then we stopped. Because the truth was too painful. We had spent decades trapped in roles neither of us had chosen. Elaine had been rewarded for being strong. I had been punished for being honest about weakness. She had learned to hide emotion. I had learned to express it. And then we had spent our entire adult lives judging each other for the coping mechanisms our family had created. A few months later, Aunt Frances called me. She was my mother's sister. She had always been kinder to me than I understood. We talked about my mother. Then Frances said, "Your mother was afraid of you." I laughed. Me? Yes. Why? Because you noticed things. I became quiet. What things? Things she didn't want noticed. Like what? Frances sighed. Your mother was not always fair. I know. Not just to you. I waited. To Elaine too. That surprised me. Elaine. Your sister was the strong one because your mother needed her to be strong. I thought about that. Frances continued. Your mother told herself that Elaine could handle anything. So she gave Elaine responsibility. Then she became dependent on that responsibility. Then she couldn't imagine Elaine without it. And me. You were different. How? You felt things. That's a crime in our family? Frances laughed. Not a crime. A threat. I didn't understand. Your mother could manage Elaine.
The words landed heavily. But she couldn't manage you. I sat there silently. Frances continued. That frightened her. Why? Because you saw things. Like what? The things she was pretending weren't happening. I closed my eyes. For years, I had thought my sensitivity was my weakness. Maybe it had never been. Maybe it had simply been inconvenient. Elaine and I kept talking. Not every day. Not even every week. But regularly. Sometimes we fought. Once, we didn't speak for nearly a month. The old patterns didn't disappear because of one letter. There were moments when Elaine slipped back into being the responsible older sister. There were moments when I became defensive. There were moments when she told me I was overreacting. And there were moments when I accused her of not listening. But something was different. Now we knew what was happening. We could name it. You're doing the Elaine thing, I told her once. What does that mean? You're trying to fix me. I'm not trying to fix you. You just gave me 3 solutions. She stopped, then laughed. Okay, maybe I am. And you're doing the Clara thing. What is the Clara thing? You're assuming I'm judging you before I've finished speaking. I stared at her. That's not fair. I know. We both laughed. That was progress. Not perfection. Progress. Then, almost a year after the letter, Elaine called me. I found something. What? I was cleaning out Mom's office. My heart tightened. What did you find? A journal. Mom's. Yes. About what? I don't know. Have you read it? No. Why? Because I thought you should see it first. I was silent. Clara, I'm here. Do you want it? I thought about it. Then I said, I want to read it with you. There was a long pause. Okay. We agreed to meet at the old house. Elaine still owned it. She hadn't moved in. She said she couldn't. Too many memories. Too much history. When I arrived, the house felt different. Not because anything had changed. Because we had. Elaine was waiting in the living room. The journal was on the table. Old. Worn. The cover was faded. She pushed it toward me. I touched it. Where did you find it? Behind a box of old papers. What year? 1994. My hands froze. That was the year after our father died. I looked at Elaine. Have you read anything? No. Good. Why? Because I don't want to know what she wrote until we're both ready. Elaine nodded. We opened the journal together. The first pages were ordinary. Grocery lists. Appointments. Notes about bills. Then we found the entries. My mother's handwriting. The first entry was dated January. She had written about grief. About fear. About raising 2 daughters who needed different things. Then I saw my own name. I stopped. Elaine looked at me. Read it. I couldn't. Read it with me. So we did. And what we discovered changed the story again. My mother had been worried about both of us. She had worried that Elaine was becoming too responsible, too controlled, too determined never to need anyone. And she had worried about me because I felt everything. She had written that I was sensitive. But not in the way she later used the word. She had written, Clara notices what others ignore. I looked at Elaine. She was crying. I continued, that is a gift. But I am afraid she will think it is a curse. I closed the journal. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Elaine whispered. She knew. Yes. She knew who you were. Yes. Then why did she let me believe otherwise? I had no answer. And maybe that was the hardest truth of all. Our mother had understood more than we knew. She had seen the damage. She had recognized the pattern. And still, she had not known how to stop it. That afternoon, Elaine and I sat in the living room for hours. We read. We talked. We cried. Sometimes we simply sat in silence. For the first time in our lives, we were looking at the same family history. Not hers. Not mine. Ours. And somewhere between those pages, something changed. I stopped seeing Elaine as the sister who had believed the wrong story. She stopped seeing me as the sister who had caused all the trouble. We became two women who had been given different pieces of the same broken family. And finally, we were putting them together. Years have passed since that letter was read. The house was eventually sold. Elaine chose not to keep it. Some people thought that was strange. I understood. The house had been the center of our family for decades. But sometimes a place holds too much history. Sometimes leaving is not abandonment. Sometimes it is permission to begin somewhere else. Elaine and I are not suddenly inseparable. We didn't become the kind of sisters who call every morning. We don't agree on everything. We still have moments when the past reaches into the present. But now, when it does, we know what to do. We talk. We ask questions. We don't assume. And
Because
that has
you were
made
holding
all the
my
difference.
hand.
1 year, on the anniversary of our
Elaine
mother's
laughed.
death, Elaine
I
asked
probably
me to
had
go with
to.
her to the cemetery.
What does that mean?
I almost said no.
You were a
Then I
terrible
remembered
child.
something.
I was
My
6.
mother had spent years trying to
Exactly.
control the
I
story
smiled.
of our family.
Then she
Her
said,
final letter
"Where
had
did
done
you
the
find
opposite.
it?"
It
"In the
had
box
finally
from Mom's
released the
house."
story.
Another
We stood
silence.
beside her grave.
This one was
Elaine
different.
looked at me.
What do you want
Do
to
you
do
think
with
she
it?
knew this would happen?
I don't know.
What?
Keep it.
Us. I was thinking
looked
of
at the
sending you a
stone.
copy.
I don't know.
Why? Elaine
I
was
looked
quiet.
down
at the photograph.
Then she said,
Because I think
wish
I
she
need
had
to
done
remember
it
that you
sooner.
weren't always
So
the
do
person
I.
I thought you
Do
were.
you
think we could have fixed
Elaine
this while
didn't
she was
answer.
alive? When she finally
I
spoke,
thought about
her
that.
voice was quieter.
Maybe.
And I need
That's
to remember
not
that you
very
weren't
convincing.
always the person
No.
Mom told me
I
you
smiled
were. Sadly. We stayed
Because
on the phone
I
for a
don't
while.
know.
Neither
Elaine
of us
nodded.
wanted to hang up.
Then she said,
It was strange.
"Would we have been
After
ready?"
decades of distance,
I looked at my
silence
sister,
between us had
the
become
girl who had
uncomfortable.
become
the responsible
Now,
daughter.
silence felt
the woman
like
who had
something
spent
we could
decades
share.
believing
A few
I was
weeks
fragile.
later, Elaine
the person
came to
who had
visit me.
finally looked
She
at me
brought
and
the
seen the
photograph.
truth.
I had
Maybe
given
not,
her a
I
copy.
said.
She
She had
nodded.
framed it. That's
I
what
stared
think
at it.
too.
You
We
framed
stood
it.
there together.
Yes.
Two sisters.
Why?
Two
Because
survivors
I want
of
to
the same
remember.
family.
I
Two
smiled.
people who had
That's
lost years
very
they could never
dramatic.
get back.
You're rubbing
And
off
yet,
on me.
somehow,
We
we had
laughed.
found something waiting
Then
for
she
us
sat
at the
down.
end of all that
I've
loss.
been thinking
Not the childhood
about
we should have
Mom.
had.
That
Not
was
the
always
perfect relationship
dangerous
we
territory.
might have imagined.
What about her?
Something better.
About what she
something
wrote.
real.
I waited.
I used to think being
Elaine
the family
looked
problem meant
uncomfortable.
there was something
There
wrong
was
with me.
something in
I
the
spent
journal.
years trying
What?
to become easier.
Something
we
didn't
quieter.
read.
Less
I frowned.
emotional.
What do
less
you mean?
complicated. I
I
found
thought
if I
another
could just
section.
become the kind of person
When?
everyone wanted
Before
me to be,
I called
the
you.
family would
Why
finally
didn't
accept
you
me.
tell me?
But that
Because
was
I
never
wasn't
the answer.
sure whether
the
I
problem
should.
was never
I felt
that
my
I was
old
too
defensiveness
much.
rising.
The problem was that
Then
people
I
had
stopped.
decided what I was
Okay.
before they bothered to know
Elaine
me.
looked
My mother's
surprised.
letter did not
Okay.
erase the past.
Yes.
It did something
You
more
aren't
important.
angry.
It
I
gave
might
the
be
past a
later.
name.
She
And once we
smiled.
could name what had
Fair.
happened, we
What
could
did you
finally stop
find?
pretending it hadn't.
Elaine reached
My sister
into her bag.
and I lost 30
She pulled
years.
out several
we
pages.
cannot recover
Copies.
but we can
Not the
refuse to
original.
lose the years we
These
have
were
left.
loose pages.
That is what
I took
forgiveness
them.
means to me
The
now.
handwriting
was
not
my
forgetting.
mother's. The
Not
first line
pretending.
read, not
Some
saying
truths
that
are
easier
everything
to
was
hide
okay.
when everyone believes
Forgiveness
they are
is
protecting
telling the
someone.
truth about what happened.
I looked
and then
at
deciding
Elaine.
that the truth
What does
will not
that mean?
control everything that
I
happens
don't
next.
know.
My
I
mother
read the
was
next
not
page.
a villain.
And then
She
I
was
stopped.
not a saint.
There was a
She was a
name.
woman who
Our
loved her
father's
children
name
and still hurt them.
Richard. She
I
was a
looked
woman
at
who
Elaine.
tried to manage
What does
pain
Dad
instead
have to
of
do with
confronting
this?
it. She was
She
a woman
shook her
who
head.
waited too long
I
to
don't
tell
know.
the truth.
Have you
But
read
in the
the
end,
whole thing?
she told it.
Yes.
And because she did,
And
two
I
daughters
think
who had
we
spent
should
most
read
of their
it together.
lives standing on opposite
My
sides of a
stomach
story
tightened.
finally stepped into
Okay.
the same room.
We
I turned
looked at
the page.
each other.
and
my
for the
mother's
first time,
words pulled
neither
us
of us was
backward,
looking through
back
our
to the
mother's
year
eyes.
before our
We
father
were
died,
finally seeing
back
each
to
other,
a family
and
secret
sometimes
neither of
that
us
is where a
had known
family begins
existed.
again.
My daughters,
Not with an apology.
there are things I
not
did not
with
tell
an
you about your
inheritance.
father.
Not with
because
a perfect
I wanted
ending,
to protect
but
his
with
reputation.
the courage to say,
Not because
I
I
thought
wanted
I
to
knew
protect
you.
mine.
I was wrong.
I kept them hidden
Tell
because
me
I
who you
believed
really
that children
are,
should not carry the
and then
weight of
staying
adult
long
decisions.
enough to listen.
But
If you've
children
ever
grow,
been labeled the
and
difficult
secrets
one in
do
your
not
family,
disappear
remember
simply
this.
because the
A
people
role
who
given to
kept
you
them die.
is not the
Your
same
father
thing as
was
an
not
identity
the man
you have
you
to
remember.
keep.
But he
Sometimes
was
the
also
person
not the
everyone
man
calls
you might
difficult
imagine
is
after
simply the
reading
person
this.
who refuses
He was
to pretend.
both. People
Sometimes
are
the family
often both.
scapegoat is the
That
only
is what
person willing
makes
to
truth
ask why
so
everyone
difficult.
else is pretending
Your father
everything is
struggled
fine.
with something
And sometimes
I did not
the truth
understand
takes
when I
years
was
to
younger.
arrive. He
But
carried
when it finally
anger.
does,
Not
it can
always
change
toward
everything.
us.
My name
Sometimes
is
toward
Clara
himself.
Whitmore.
For
He
most
was
of my
afraid
life,
of
I
failure,
thought my sister was
afraid
the
of
person who
losing
knew me
control.
least. Now I
Afraid
know
of
she was
becoming
simply the
like
person
his
who
own
had been
father,
given the wrong
and in
story.
trying so
And the
desperately
greatest
not to
gift
become
my
that
mother
man,
ever gave
he
us was
sometimes
not the
became
house.
someone else who
It
could
wasn't
hurt the
the
people
money.
he loved.
It
I
wasn't
knew
the
this.
letter itself.
I saw it.
It was
And
the
I
chance
stayed.
to finally
I
tell
told
each other
myself
the
I
truth.
stayed because
And
I
this
loved
time,
him. Neither of us
sometimes
walked
I
away
stayed
because
Part
I was
two.
afraid.
The things we never
Sometimes
said.
those reasons
For the first
were the
few
same.
months after my
I
mother's
stopped
death,
reading.
Elaine and I were
Elaine
careful
looked at
with
me.
each other.
Do you want
careful.
to continue?
We had discovered
I
the truth.
nodded.
But discovering
Yes.
the truth
The
did
next
not
page
automatically
revealed
teach us
something
what to
neither
do with
of
it.
us expected.
There were years between
Our
us
father
that
had
couldn't
been
be erased
considering
by a single
leaving.
letter.
Not
There were
because he didn't
conversations
love us,
we had never
because
had.
he believed he was
Arguments
failing
we
us.
had never finished.
My mother had written that
Apologies
he had once
that
told
had
her
arrived
he thought Elaine
decades
would be
too
better
late.
off without
And
him.
beneath all
But
of
he
it
had
was
never
one
said that to
uncomfortable
us.
question
He
neither
had
of
hidden
us
his
wanted
fear.
to ask.
My
What
mother
if we had hidden
never
hers?
been sisters
And the
at
two
all.
of them had
What if we
created a
had simply
household
been two
where
people
everyone
assigned
was
to the same
protecting
family,
everyone
taught
else
to
from
play
the truth,
opposite roles,
until the
and left
truth
to believe
became
those
the
roles
thing
were
that
our
damaged
personalities
us most?
I thought
I
about
put the
that
pages
question
down.
often. I never
Especially
knew.
after I
Neither
found
did
the
I.
photograph.
Did Mom
It was
know
a small
he was
thing.
thinking of
A
leaving?
photograph shouldn't have been
Apparently.
able to change
Why
anything.
didn't she tell
But
us?
sometimes the
Elaine
smallest
looked at
objects
me
carry the
because
heaviest
we were
memories.
children.
I found it
I
in
shook
an
my
old
head.
box while cleaning
We
my
were
apartment.
children then.
The box had
Yes,
belonged to my
but
mother.
we were adults
I had
when
brought
she
it
died.
home after
Elaine
the house
didn't
was sold.
answer.
Inside
I
were
stood
birthday
up.
cards,
I
old
walked
receipts,
to the window.
a few photographs,
Outside,
and a collection
the
of
rain
letters
had
I had
started.
forgotten
I
existed.
watched the drops
I almost
run down
threw
the
the
glass.
entire box
Why
away.
would she put
Then
this
I
in
saw
a journal?
the photograph.
Maybe
It was
she
taken
needed
in our
somewhere
backyard.
to tell the truth.
I was 6.
Then why didn't
Elaine
she tell
was
us?
20.
Maybe
My
she
father
was
had
waiting.
been dead for less
For
than
what?
a year.
Elaine
I was sitting on the
looked at
grass with a
pages.
red plastic
For
ball
us
in
to
my
be
lap.
ready.
Elaine
I
was
turned
standing
around,
behind me,
ready for
and
what?
my mother was
She
sitting
looked
beside
at me.
us.
To
All three of
understand
us
that
were looking
our
at the
parents
camera,
were people.
but that
I
wasn't
didn't
what
like
caught
that
my
answer.
attention.
Because
it was
I knew
Elaine's
she was
hand.
right. She
When
was
you're young,
holding mine.
parents are
I
supposed to
stared
be
at that
larger than
photograph
life
for a long time.
They are supposed to
I
know
couldn't remember
everything.
the day.
They are
I
supposed
couldn't
to
remember
have
the
answers.
moment. But
I
eventually,
remembered the
you
feeling.
become old enough
Safe.
to realize they
That
were
was
just
the
people.
strange part.
People who were
For
scared.
years, I had
People
remembered
who
Elaine
made
as
mistakes.
distant. People
Older,
who sometimes
too
had
busy,
no idea
too
what they were
responsible
doing.
to have
And
time
maybe
for
that
me.
was the truth
But
my
there
mother
she
had
was,
spent her whole life
holding
trying
my
to avoid.
hand. She
Maybe
had
the
wanted
story
us to
I had been
remember
telling
her
myself
as our
wasn't
mother.
completely
Not
true
as
either.
Patricia.
Maybe I had
Not
also
as a
been
woman
choosing
who was
memories that
frightened.
supported the role
Not as a
I had
wife
been
who
given.
had stayed in a marriage
Maybe I had
filled
spent
with
so much
uncertainty.
time thinking about how
Not as a
Elaine
parent
had
who
failed
had
to
made
understand
decisions
that
that
I had
affected
forgotten
her daughters
all the
for
times she had
decades.
tried.
She had
That
wanted to be the
realization
safe
hurt,
version of herself.
because it meant I
and
couldn't
when that
blame
became
everything
impossible,
on my mother.
she finally
Some
left
of
us
the distance
truth.
between us
The next
had
morning,
become something
Elaine
we
called
had
me.
both maintained.
There's more.
I called
I knew
Elaine.
exactly what
she
she meant.
answered on the
Where?
fourth ring.
In the
Hey,
journal. Daniel.
Hey.
What? A
There
reference
was a
to
pause.
someone named
I
Daniel.
found something.
I froze.
That sounds ominous.
Who is Daniel?
I laughed.
I don't know.
It isn't.
Did Mom know
Okay.
someone named Daniel?
A photograph.
Probably.
Of what?
That's not
Us.
helpful. That's
I'm
not
aware.
exactly
I
rare.
searched my
This
memory.
one is nothing.
Why?
Then I remembered something. Wait. What? Daniel Harper. Who? He was Dad's business partner. Elaine was silent. Are you sure? Yes. How do you know? I remember him. You were 6. I remember his car. Elaine laughed. Of course you do. It was green. Clara. I'm serious. Okay. Green car.
Daniel Harper. Yes. Why would Mom be writing about him? I don't know. Then we need to find out. We began searching through old family records. It became an obsession. We looked through photographs, letters, receipts, documents. Because you were holding my hand. Silence. Then Elaine laughed. I probably had to. What does that mean? You were a terrible child. I was 6. Exactly. I smiled. Then she said, "Where did you find it?" "In the box from Mom's house." Another silence. This one was different. "What do you want to do with it?" "I don't know. Keep it. I was thinking of sending you a copy." "Why?" I looked down at the photograph. "Because I think I need to remember that you weren't always the person I thought you were." Elaine didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter. "And I need to remember that you weren't always the person Mom told me you were." We stayed on the phone for a while. Neither of us wanted to hang up. It was strange. After decades of distance, silence between us had become uncomfortable. Now, silence felt like something we could share. A few weeks later, Elaine came to visit me. She brought the photograph. I had given her a copy. She had framed it. I stared at it. "You framed it?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I want to remember." I smiled. "That's very dramatic. You're rubbing off on me." We laughed. Then she sat down. "I've been thinking about Mom." That was always dangerous territory. "What about her?" "About what she wrote." I waited. Elaine looked uncomfortable. There was something in the journal. "What?" "Something we didn't read." I frowned. "What do you mean?" I found another section. "When?" "Before I called you." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wasn't sure whether I should." I felt my old defensiveness rising. Then I stopped. "Okay." Elaine looked surprised. "Okay." "Yes." "You aren't angry?" "I might be later." She smiled. "Fair. What did you find?" Elaine reached into her bag. She pulled out several pages. Copies. Not the original. These were loose pages. I took them. The handwriting was my mother's. The first line read, "Some truths are easier to hide when everyone believes they are protecting someone." I looked at Elaine. "What does that mean?" "I don't know." I read the next page. And then I stopped. There was a name. Our father's name. Richard. I looked at Elaine. "What does Dad have to do with this?" She shook her head. "I don't know." "Have you read the whole thing?" "Yes. And I think we should read it together." My stomach tightened. "Okay." I turned the page. And my mother's words pulled us backward. Back to the year before our father died. Back to a family secret neither of us had known existed. "My daughters. There are things I did not tell you about your father. Not because I wanted to protect his reputation. Not because I wanted to protect mine. I kept them hidden because I believed that children should not carry the weight of adult decisions. But children grow. And secrets do not disappear simply because the people who kept them die. Your father was not the man you remember. But he was also not the man you might imagine after reading this. He was both. People are often both. That is what makes truth so difficult. Your father struggled with something I did not understand when I was younger. He carried anger. Not always toward us. Sometimes toward himself. He was afraid of failure. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of becoming like his own father. And in trying so desperately not to become that man, he sometimes became someone else who could hurt the people he loved. I knew this. I saw it. And I stayed. I told myself I stayed because I loved him, Sometimes I stayed because I was afraid. Sometimes those reasons were the same. I stopped reading. Elaine looked at me. Do you want to continue? I nodded. Yes. The next page revealed something neither of us expected. Our father had been considering leaving. Not because he didn't love us. Because he believed he was failing us. My mother had written that he had once told her he thought Elaine would be better off without him. But he had never said that to us. He had hidden his fear. My mother had hidden hers. And the two of them had created a household where everyone was protecting everyone else from the truth. Until the truth became the thing that damaged us most. I put the pages down. I never knew. Neither did I. Did Mom know he was thinking of leaving? Apparently. Why didn't she tell us? Elaine looked at me. Because we were children. I shook my head. We were children then. Yes. But we were adults when she died. Elaine didn't answer. I stood up. I walked to the window. Outside, the rain had started. I watched the drops run down the glass. Why would she put this in a journal? Maybe she needed somewhere to tell the truth. Then why didn't she tell us? Maybe she was waiting. For what? Elaine looked at the pages. For us to be ready. I turned around. Ready for what? She looked at me. To understand that our parents were people. I didn't like that answer. Because I knew she was right. When you're young, parents are supposed to be larger than life. They are supposed to know everything. They are supposed to have answers. But eventually, you become old enough to realize they were just people. People who were scared. People who made mistakes. People who sometimes had no idea what they were doing. And maybe that was the truth my mother had spent her whole life trying to avoid. She had wanted us to remember her as our mother. Not as Patricia. Not as a woman who was frightened. Not as a wife who had stayed in a marriage filled with uncertainty. Not as a parent who had made decisions that affected her daughters for decades. She had wanted to be the safe version of herself. And when that became impossible, she finally left us the truth. The next morning, Elaine called me. There's more. I knew exactly what she meant. Where? In the journal. What? A reference to someone named Daniel. I froze. Who is Daniel? I don't know. Did Mom know someone named Daniel? Probably. That's not helpful. I'm aware. I searched my memory. Nothing. Then I remembered something. Wait. What? Daniel Harper. Who? He was Dad's business partner. Elaine was silent. Are you sure? Yes. How do you know? I remember him. You were 6. I remember his car. Elaine laughed. Of course you do. It was green. Clara. I'm serious. Okay. Green car. Daniel Harper. Yes. Why would Mom be writing about him? I don't know. Then we need to find out. We began searching through old family records. It became an obsession. We looked through photographs, letters, receipts, documents, anything that might explain why my mother had mentioned Daniel. Then we found an old envelope. It had never been opened. The return address was Daniel Harper. The date was 30 years old. Elaine stared at it. Do you think we should open it? I don't know. It's addressed to Mom. She's dead. That's not an answer. I looked at the envelope. Maybe some things should stay closed. Elaine stared at me. That's what Mom said. I felt a chill. You're right. We opened it. Inside was a single letter. It was from Daniel. The letter explained something that changed everything we thought we knew about our father's final year. Richard had been struggling financially. The business had been failing. He had borrowed money. He had made decisions he regretted. and Daniel had discovered the truth. But the letter contained something else. Something more painful. Our father had not died accidentally. Not entirely. His death had been ruled an accident. But Daniel's letter suggested that Richard had been driving that night after receiving devastating news. He had intended to leave town. He had intended to disappear. He had not intended to die. But he had been exhausted, distracted, and afraid. I sat down. Elaine was crying. Why didn't Mom tell us? I don't know. She knew. Maybe. She knew. Her voice rose. I didn't respond. She looked at me. All these years. Elaine. All these years, I thought Dad died in an accident. He did. But he was trying to leave. Maybe. That's different. Yes. She stood up. How could she do this? I didn't answer. Because I was asking myself the same question. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my father. A man I barely remembered. A man I had spent my childhood idealizing because there were so few memories left. Now those memories were changing. Not disappearing. Changing. I remembered him carrying me. I remembered his laugh. I remembered sitting on his shoulders. I remembered the smell of his jacket. And now I wondered whether he had been planning to leave us. I felt betrayed by someone who had been dead for decades. That is the strange cruelty of secrets. They can hurt you long after the people who created them are gone. The next day, Elaine and I met again. She looked exhausted. I want to find Daniel. He's probably dead. Maybe. Then what? We find his family. Why? Because I need answers. I understood. We began searching. It took weeks. Daniel had moved several times. Eventually, we found a son. His name was Matthew. He lived in Connecticut. I called him. I explained who I was. There was a long silence. Then he said, "I know who you are." My heart stopped. What do you mean? My father talked about your family. About my father? Yes. What did he say? Matthew hesitated. Do you really want to know? Yes. Then you should come here. Elaine drove. I sat beside her. Neither of us spoke much. The journey took 2 hours. At some point, Elaine said, "Are you scared?" Yes. Me too. Why? Because what if we find out our whole childhood was built on a lie? I looked out the window. It wasn't. How do you know? Because even if the facts were wrong, the memories were real. Elaine nodded. That's something I learned from you. What? That two things can be true at the same time. I smiled. You're finally learning. She laughed. Then she reached over and squeezed my hand. Just like the photograph. For 1 second, I was 6 again. And I realized something. Maybe the story of my sister and me had never been about two people who didn't love each other. Maybe it had always been about two people who didn't know how to reach each other. Matthew Harper was 62. He looked remarkably like his father. When he opened the door, I felt like I was looking at a ghost. Clara. Yes. He looked at Elaine. Elaine. She nodded. He stepped aside. Come in. We entered the house. On the wall were photographs. Daniel. His wife. Their children. Their grandchildren. A life that had continued. A life that existed outside ours. Matthew sat down. My father kept everything. What do you mean? Letters. From my mother? Some. From my father? Yes. I felt my heart pound. Can we see them? Matthew looked at me. I think that's why he asked me to keep them. Asked you. He knew I might meet you someday. Why? Because he knew your mother would eventually tell you. Elaine stared at him. She never did. Matthew looked surprised. Then why are you here? I placed the letter on the table. Because we found this. He read it. Then he closed his eyes. My father was afraid of this day. Why? Because he didn't want you to think your father abandoned you. I felt tears rise. Did he? Matthew shook his head. No. Then what happened? Your father believed he had failed. That's not the same thing. No. Matthew looked at me. He was going to leave because he thought leaving was the only way to stop hurting your mother. I felt my chest tighten. Did he hurt her? Matthew hesitated. Not the way you're thinking. Then what? He was angry. At her. At himself. I looked at Elaine. Matthew continued. Your father had lost control of his business. He had debts. He was ashamed. He believed your mother would eventually hate him. She didn't. I know. Then why did he leave? He didn't. I froze. What? He never left. What are you talking about? He drove that night because he was going to meet my father. Why? To ask for help. I stared at him. Matthew continued. He was going to ask Daniel to take over the business debts. Then what happened? He never made it. Silence. Why did Mom say he was just driving home? Matthew looked down. Because she didn't want you to know how desperate he had become. Elaine whispered. She protected his reputation. Matthew nodded. And yours? I looked at him. Mine. She wanted you to remember your father as the man who loved you. I didn't know whether to be angry or grateful. Maybe both. Matthew gave us a box. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Some from Daniel. Some from my father. One was addressed to my mother. One was addressed to Elaine. And one had my name. I held it. My hands were shaking. Did my father write this? Matthew nodded. Yes. When? The day before he died. I couldn't breathe. Why didn't he send it? He did. I looked at him. What? Your mother received it. I stared at the envelope. She never gave it to me. Matthew didn't answer. Elaine reached for my arm. I opened the letter. My father's handwriting was uneven. He wrote, Clara, you are too young to understand this now. But someday you may wonder why I wasn't there to watch you grow up. I need you to know something. It was never because you weren't enough. It was because I was afraid I wasn't. You have always been the brightest thing in my life. Don't let my failures become your identity. Be brave enough to ask questions. Be brave enough to feel things. And never let anyone convince you that your heart is a weakness. Love. Dad. I couldn't read anymore. I broke down. Elaine wrapped her arms around me. And for the first time in my life, my sister held me while I cried. Not because I was the difficult one. Not because I was fragile. Because I was her sister. And I needed someone. We stayed with Matthew for hours. Before leaving, I asked him one question. Did my father know my mother was going to tell us? Matthew shook his head. No. Then why did he write that? Because he knew someday you would need to hear it. I looked at the letter. Maybe he had been right. Maybe people leave pieces of themselves behind without knowing when those pieces will finally find their way to the people who need them. On the drive home, Elaine was quiet. Finally, she said, I think I owe Dad an apology. I looked at her. Why? Because I spent my whole life thinking he was perfect. I smiled. That's not your fault. No. She stared through the windshield. But it made it easier to judge you. I didn't understand. She continued. If Dad was perfect, then Mom was right about everything. I understood. And if Mom was right about everything, then you were always the problem. I looked out the window. Elaine. I'm sorry. I know. No. I don't think you do. She pulled the car over. We sat on the side of the road. Elaine turned toward me. I spent my whole life thinking I was protecting this family. She was crying. But I was protecting a story. I said nothing. I believed you were unstable because Mom told me you were. Sometimes I was. Everyone is sometimes. Yes. But you got better. Yes. And instead of seeing that, I kept waiting for you to fail again. I looked at her. Why? Because if you failed, then I was right. That hurt. But it was honest. And honesty was what we had promised each other. So I nodded. Thank you for telling me. Elaine wiped her face. I don't want to be right anymore. I reached across the space between us. She took my hand. Neither of us said anything else. We didn't need to. The next year changed us. Not dramatically. Not all at once. But steadily. Elaine began telling me things she had never told anyone. About the pressure she felt growing up. About being afraid to disappoint our mother. About how exhausting it was to always be the responsible one. I began telling her things too. About how lonely I had felt. About how exhausting it was to always defend myself. We discovered that our childhoods had been opposite in ways that were strangely similar. She had been praised until she felt trapped. I had been criticized until I felt invisible. She had been told she was strong until she forgot how to ask for help. I had been told I was sensitive until I forgot that sensitivity could be strength. And both of us had spent years wishing we could be more like the other. That was the cruelest part. I wanted her confidence. She wanted my freedom. Neither of us understood that the other was struggling too. One evening, Elaine asked me something. Do you ever wish Mom hadn't written the letter? I thought about it. Yes. She looked surprised. Why? Because now I know. Know what? How much time we lost. Elaine looked down. I think about that too. But then I remember that without the letter, we might never have changed. That's true. So I don't know. Elaine smiled. That's very philosophical. I'm getting old. Don't say that. Why? Because then I'll have to admit I'm getting old too. We laughed. Then Elaine became serious. Clara. Yes. If Mom had told us the truth while she was alive, do you think we would have forgiven her? I thought for a long time. No. Why not? Because we were too angry. At her. At everything. Elaine nodded. And now? Now I'm not sure forgiveness was ever the point. What was? Understanding. She looked at me. Understanding what? That she was human. Elaine smiled sadly. That's harder than forgiveness. Much harder. Years later, I found myself standing in the same kitchen where I had spent my childhood. The house belonged to someone else now. But Elaine had rented it for one evening. She wanted to bring the family together. Not for a funeral. Not for an inheritance meeting. Not because something had gone wrong. Just because. A family dinner. It was strange. People sat around the table. We ate. We talked. We laughed. And for once, nobody was performing. No one was pretending to be the perfect family. We were simply people. Broken in different places. Healing at different speeds. Still learning. After dinner, Elaine and I stayed behind. Everyone else left. We stood in the kitchen. The same kitchen where so many old arguments had begun. Elaine looked around. Do you remember the first time we fought here? Which one? She laughed. Fair. I remember one. Which? The one where you told me I was ruining the family. Elaine's face changed. I said that. Yes. I was 19. I was 13. I was awful. You were scared. She looked at me. How do you know? Because I was scared too. We stood there. Then Elaine said, "Do you forgive me?" I thought about the question. Yes. She nodded. "Do you forgive Mom?" I looked around the kitchen. I thought about the letter, the journal, the secrets, the pain, the years. Then I said, "Yes." "Do you forgive Dad?" I smiled. "I think I do." Elaine nodded. "Do you forgive yourself?" That question stopped me. I looked at her. For what? For believing them. I didn't answer. She stepped closer. "Clara, you spent years thinking there was something wrong with you. I know. That wasn't your fault. I know." "No." She took my hand. "I don't think you do." I looked down. She continued. "You don't have to forgive yourself for surviving the only way you knew how." My eyes filled with tears. I squeezed her hand. And in that moment, I understood something I had never understood before. Sometimes the person you need to forgive most is yourself. Not because you did something terrible. Because you spent years believing terrible things about yourself. I wish I could tell you that everything became perfect after that. It didn't. Life doesn't work that way. People still disappoint each other. Families still argue. Old wounds still hurt. There are still days when Elaine says something and I hear our mother's voice behind it. There are still moments when she sees me become upset and instinctively tries to fix the problem. But now we recognize it. We stop. We breathe. We talk. That is the difference. The old pattern is still there. But it no longer controls us. And maybe that is what healing really means. Not removing the wound. Learning how to live without letting it make every decision. One morning, years after my mother's death, I received a letter. There was no return address. I almost threw it away. Then I saw the handwriting. It belonged to Elaine. Inside was a single page. She had written, "Dear Clara, I know we don't write letters anymore. But I wanted you to have this. I found it in an old box. It is a list Mom made when we were children. Things she wanted for us. I thought you should see it. Not because it changes anything. But because I think you deserve to know. She wanted us to be kind. She wanted us to be brave. She wanted us to be independent. And she wanted us to love each other. She failed at some of those things. So did we. But I think we are finally trying. Your sister, Elaine." Attached was a list. 3 words had been underlined. Kind. Brave. Together. I stared at that list for a long time. Then I called Elaine. She answered. "Did you get it?" "Yes." "Did you read it?" "Yes." "Well." I smiled. "I think Mom would be disappointed." "Why?" "Because we're finally doing what she wanted." Elaine laughed. Then she said. "She was never very good at getting what she wanted." "No. But maybe she finally got this one." I looked at the 3 words. Kind. Brave. Together. Maybe. My mother's story ended when she died. But ours didn't. That is what I understand now. Parents leave. Houses are sold. Photographs fade. Letters become yellow. But the stories families tell about one another can survive for generations. The question is whether those stories are true. For most of my life, I believed I was the daughter who needed fixing. Then I discovered I was simply the daughter nobody had learned to understand. Elaine believed she was the daughter who had everything together. Then she discovered she was simply the daughter who had never been allowed to fall apart. Our mother believed she was protecting us. Then, at the end of her life, she realized she had been protecting herself from the consequences of her own choices. And our father. I think he spent his final years believing that his failures made him unworthy of love. Maybe that was the greatest tragedy of all. Because none of us are only our worst moments. None of us are only our mistakes. None of us are the names other people give us when they don't know how to understand us. We are more complicated than that. More human. More unfinished. And perhaps that's why I keep the photograph. The one of Elaine holding my hand. It reminds me that the truth is rarely as simple as the story we remember. I spent years believing my sister had never been there for me. The photograph proved otherwise. She had been there. I just hadn't known how to see it. And maybe she had spent years believing I didn't need her. The letter proved otherwise. I had needed her. I simply didn't know how to ask. That is the tragedy of families. Sometimes people love each other deeply and still spend decades hurting each other. Not because the love isn't real. Because the fear is louder. But fear does not have to win forever. Sometimes one person has to tell the truth. Sometimes one person has to stop defending the old story. Sometimes one person has to say, "This is not who I am." And sometimes another person has to answer, "I believe you." That was the beginning of everything for Elaine and me. Not the letter. Not the journal. Not the secrets about our parents. The beginning was the moment she looked at me and believed me. And I looked at her and finally believed her too. We had spent years asking who was right. Now we ask a better question. What happened? Because once you stop fighting over who is right, you can finally begin understanding what happened. And once you understand what happened, you can decide what happens next. That is the choice we were given. That is the choice every family eventually faces. Repeat the story. Or change it. Elaine and I chose to change it. Not perfectly. Not quickly. But together. And sometimes, after a lifetime of being misunderstood, the greatest revenge isn't proving everyone wrong. It's becoming so comfortable with who you really are that you no longer need anyone else to approve of the truth. My name is Clara Whitmore. I was once the difficult daughter. The emotional one. The fragile one. The problem. Today, I know better. I was a daughter who was hurting. A sister who wanted to be understood. A woman who spent too many years believing someone else's version of herself. And now I am simply Clara. And that is enough. If you've ever been misunderstood by your own family, I hope you remember something I learned too late. You don't have to spend your whole life trying to convince people who you are. Sometimes you simply have to become brave enough to know it yourself. And when the people you love finally ask you to tell them the truth, don't waste the opportunity. Tell them. Even if your voice shakes. Even if it changes everything. Because sometimes the truth doesn't destroy a family. Sometimes the truth is the first thing that gives a family a chance to become one. Part 3. The Last Secret. For a while, I thought the secrets were over. I was wrong. The discovery of my father's letter had changed the way I understood my childhood. The letter from my mother had changed the way I understood my sister. The journal had changed the way I understood my mother. I thought there was nothing left. Then Elaine called me one Thursday morning. Her voice sounded different. Not sad. Not frightened. Uncertain. "Clara, are you sitting down?" I laughed. That's never a good way to start a conversation. "I know. What happened?" "I found another box." I stopped smiling. "Where?" "At the storage unit." "What storage unit?" "The one Mom had." I frowned. I thought everything from the house was gone. So did I. "What's in it?" "I haven't opened everything." "Elaine." "I know. You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "Making me ask 20 questions before telling me the important part." She sighed. "There's a name." I felt a familiar coldness move through me. "What name?" "Your name." I was silent. "What do you mean?" I mean the box has your name written on it. Just mine. Yes. How old is it? I don't know. Open it. Another silence. Elaine. I don't think I should. Why? Because Mom wrote something on the lid. What? Elaine's voice became very quiet. She wrote, "For Clara when she is ready." I closed my eyes. I had spent my whole life waiting for my mother to explain herself. Now she was dead. And somehow, she was still finding new ways to make me wait. Where are you? At the storage unit. I'm coming. The storage facility was on the edge of town. Rows of metal doors. Concrete floors. Cold fluorescent lights. Elaine was standing outside the unit when I arrived. She looked nervous. I had never seen her nervous about a practical matter before. What's inside? I don't know. Did you read the box? No. Then let's do it. She unlocked the door. The metal rolled upward. Inside were dozens of containers. Most were labeled. Tax documents. Medical records. Family photographs. Christmas decorations. Then I saw it. A small cardboard box. My name was written across the top. Clara. Nothing else. I reached for it. Elaine stopped me. Wait. I looked at her. What? Are you sure? No. Then maybe we shouldn't. I almost laughed. Elaine, we've spent the last 2 years opening things our mother hid from us. I know. Why stop now? Because this one was specifically for you. That gave me pause. I looked at the box. Then I said, "That's exactly why I need to open it." I lifted the lid. Inside was a small envelope, a photograph, and a key. The photograph was old. Very old. It showed my mother, my father, and a woman I didn't recognize. I turned it over. There was writing on the back. Patricia, Margaret, 1981. I stared at the photograph. Who is Margaret? Elaine shook her head. I don't know. I opened the envelope. Inside was a note. My mother's handwriting. Clara, if you are reading this, then I am no longer able to explain what happened. I know you will be angry. You have every right to be. But before you decide what this means, I want you to understand one thing. The decision I made was not made because I loved you less. It was made because I was afraid. I was afraid of losing you. And fear makes people do terrible things while convincing themselves they are doing them for love. The key will take you to the truth. Mom. I read the note twice. Then a third time. Elaine looked at me. What does the key open? I don't know. I held it up. There was a number engraved on the metal. Elaine looked at me. Storage locker? Maybe. We searched the paperwork. Eventually, we found another facility. Locker 217. It was located almost an hour away. We drove there in silence. Neither of us knew what we were going to find. The facility manager was an older man. When Elaine showed him the key, he looked at it. Who gave you this? My mother. Name. Patricia Whitmore. The man's expression changed. You'll need to sign something. What? Your mother left instructions. I felt my stomach drop. Of course she did. He looked at me. She told me that if either of her daughters came, I was to give them access. Either. Yes. I looked at Elaine. She looked at me. The manager continued. But she also said something else. What? She said you should not open the locker separately. I stared at him. She wanted you both here. Elaine whispered. Of course. The manager led us down the corridor. Locker 217 was at the end. I inserted the key. The lock opened. Inside was a single metal box. Nothing else. No papers. No photographs. Just the box. We carried it outside. I looked at Elaine. Open it. You do it. No. Why? Because this is your family too. Clara. We're doing this together. She nodded. Together, we opened it. Inside were 3 envelopes. One was addressed to Elaine. One to me. The third had no name. We looked at each other. Which one first? Elaine asked. The unnamed one. She picked it up. Inside was a letter. And the first line changed everything. My daughters. There is a person you have both forgotten. Her name was Margaret. Margaret had been my mother's younger sister. Her existence had been erased from our family history. Not completely. There were photographs, references, a few names, but no stories, no explanations, no memories spoken aloud. I had never heard of her. Elaine hadn't either. The letter explained why. Margaret had been 18 when she left home. She had fallen in love. My grandparents had disapproved. My mother had supported her. At least initially. Then something happened. Something no one had ever told us. Margaret became pregnant. The man she loved left. My grandparents wanted her to give the child up. Margaret refused. She left. She took her baby and disappeared. My mother had helped her. But years later, when my grandmother became ill, Margaret returned. And that was when everything changed. My mother had been forced to choose. Her own mother. Or her sister. She chose her mother. Margaret never forgave her. They never spoke again. Until the day Margaret died. I looked at Elaine. Why didn't Mom ever tell us? The answer was in the next paragraph. Because Margaret's daughter became part of your father's family. I stopped. Elaine's face went pale. What does that mean? I continued reading. The woman in the photograph is Margaret. The child she carried was raised by another family. That child grew up. And years later, she married someone connected to your father. Elaine stared at me. Who? I read the next line. And my entire body went cold. Her name was Susan. I looked at Elaine. Do you know a Susan? She shook her head. No. Then suddenly her expression changed. Wait. What? My husband's mother. I stared at her. What? My mother-in-law. Her name is Susan? Yes. I couldn't speak. Elaine took the letter from my hand. She read the paragraph herself. Her face changed. No. What? This can't be right. Why? Because Susan knows Mom. What? She knew her before I met Michael. I stared at her. How? I don't know. Elaine. I don't know. She stood up. The metal chair scraped against the floor. We have to call her. Susan answered on the 3rd ring. Elaine. Mom, I need to ask you something. A pause. What? Did you know Patricia Whitmore? Silence. The silence lasted too long. Elaine looked at me. Mom. I knew your mother. My heart began pounding. How? Another pause. Where are you? That doesn't matter. It matters to me. Mom, please. Susan sighed. Who told you? Elaine looked at me. Then she said, Mom. Another silence. Then Susan said, You found the box. I felt the room tilt. How do you know about the box? Because I knew your mother would leave it. How? Because she asked me to. Elaine's voice became sharp. Why? I can't explain this over the phone. Then explain it in person. Susan hesitated. Tonight. Where? Your house. No. Elaine. You come here. Fine. She hung up. Elaine stared at the phone. She's coming. I nodded. What do you think this is? I don't know. But I did. Somewhere inside me, I knew. The story was bigger than our family. It had been moving through generations. People had been making choices, hiding things, protecting each other, hurting each other, and every generation had inherited the consequences. Susan arrived at Elaine's house at 7. She walked in carrying a small purse. She looked older than I remembered. I had met her many times, but I had never really seen her. That night, I noticed everything. The way she held herself, the tension around her eyes, the way her hands trembled. She sat down. Elaine placed the letter on the table. Susan looked at it. Then she closed her eyes. I knew this day would come. Why? Because your mother couldn't carry it forever. She's dead. I know. Then why didn't she tell us while she was alive? Susan looked at me. Because she was ashamed. Of what? Of what she did. Elaine's voice broke. What did she do? Susan took a deep breath. My mother was Margaret. Silence. The truth was finally spoken aloud. Elaine stared at her. You are Margaret's daughter. Yes. And Mom knew. Yes. Your whole life. Yes. I felt sick. How? Susan looked at me. Your mother and my mother were sisters. I already knew. But hearing it from her made it real. Then why did Mom hide you? Susan's eyes filled with tears. Because I was the child she had promised to protect. What does that mean? Susan looked at the letter. Your mother believed she had failed my mother. I waited. Margaret died angry. At Patricia. Yes. Why? Because Patricia had promised to help her. And didn't. She did. Susan looked down. But not enough. That sentence stayed with me. Not enough. How many family tragedies were built on those 3 words? Not enough love. Not enough courage. Not enough honesty. Not enough time. Susan continued. After my mother died, Patricia found me. When? When I was 27. Elaine stared. She knew where you were? Yes. Why didn't she tell us? Because I asked her not to. I was stunned. Why? Because I didn't want to destroy her family. I almost laughed. Destroy her family? Susan looked at me. You don't understand. Then explain. She nodded. Your mother believed that if she told your father, he would leave. Why? Because your father knew my father. I felt the old pieces shifting. Your father had business with my father. Elaine said. Daniel. Susan nodded. Yes. I looked at Elaine. The connections were becoming impossible to ignore. My father. Daniel. Margaret. Susan. My mother. All these lives had crossed long before Elaine and I were born. And yet we had grown up believing our family history was simple. It had never been simple. We had simply been children. Susan reached into her purse. She removed a photograph. She placed it on the table. I recognized my father. He was standing beside a younger woman, Margaret, and beside them was a little girl, Susan. I stared at the photograph. When was this taken? 1968. Why was my father there? Susan looked at me. Because he knew Margaret. How? She worked for his company. I froze. My father had known Margaret. Before he met my mother. Before I was born. Before Elaine was even an adult. The family history I thought I understood was suddenly a maze. Did my mother know? Eventually. How? Your father told her. When? After they were married. Why? Because he wanted to be honest. Elaine whispered. Then why did Mom hide everything? Susan looked at her. Because your father wasn't only telling her about Margaret. I looked at Susan. What else? She hesitated. Then she said. He told her he had promised Margaret something. What? To protect her daughter. I stared. Protect you? Susan shook her head. No. She looked at Elaine. Me. The room went silent. Elaine looked completely confused. Why would my father promise to protect you? Because he believed your father was responsible for what happened to my mother. I felt my chest tighten. What happened? Susan looked at the floor. My mother had been working with him. On what? A financial deal. I thought of Daniel. The business. Susan nodded. My mother discovered that someone was stealing money. Who? She never knew. Then what happened? She was blamed. For stealing. Yes. I felt a chill. Who blamed her? Susan looked at me. Your father. I couldn't breathe. Elaine stood up. That's impossible. Susan didn't answer. My father accused Margaret of stealing from the company? Yes. Why? Because the evidence pointed to her. Was she guilty? No. Then who was? Susan looked at me. Daniel. I felt the room go silent. Daniel. The man we had believed was my father's friend. The man whose son had given us the letter. The man who had supposedly helped my father. I looked at Elaine. That doesn't make sense. Susan continued. Daniel was stealing from the company. Why didn't Dad know? He did. I shook my head. No. Your father discovered it. Then why blame Margaret? Because Daniel threatened him. With what? Susan looked at me. Your father had been hiding something too. I felt my stomach drop. What? Susan shook her head. I don't know. Then how do you know all this? Because my mother told me. When? Before she died. Why didn't she tell anyone? Because she was afraid. Of Daniel. Susan nodded. He had money. So. He had influence. That doesn't explain it. Susan looked at Elaine. Your father wasn't afraid Daniel would hurt him. Then what? He was afraid Daniel would hurt you. The room went cold. What does that mean? Daniel knew about your family. Everyone knew about our family. Not like this. Susan leaned forward. Daniel knew your father had 2 daughters. I stared at her. Why would that matter? Because one of those daughters was not his. I couldn't speak. Elaine stared at Susan. What are you saying? Susan looked at me. Then, at Elaine. And finally she said the words. Elaine looked at me. Your father was not your biological father, Elaine. Another silence. The world seemed to stop. Then Susan said. I looked at Elaine. She was frozen. I felt the room tilt. No. How do you know about the box? No, that's because not possible. I knew your mother would leave it. I am sorry. How? My father was my father. Because she asked me to. Yes. Elaine's voice became sharp. Why are you saying this? Why? Because I can't explain this over the phone. Elaine backed away. Stop. Then explain it in person. No. Susan she looked hesitated. Clara. Tonight. I stood up. Where? Elaine. Your house. Tell her to stop. Elaine. I didn't know what to say. Here. Susan was crying. She hung up. I didn't want to tell you this. At the phone. Then she's coming. Elaine. I nodded. Don't. What do you think this is? Through the room. She grabbed her coat. But I did. I need to somewhere leave. Inside Elaine. I knew. She turned. The story was bigger than and for the first time since we had begun repairing our generations. I saw people the old had been making choices. The fear
hiding
of
things,
losing control,
protecting each other,
the fear of discovering
hurting
that everything
each
she
other,
believed about
and
herself
every
was
generation
built on something
had
unstable.
inherited
The consequences.
She looked at me.
Susan
Is
arrived
this
at
why
Elaine's
Mom
house
always
at 7.
treated me differently?
She walked in carrying
I felt
a small
tears
purse
in my eyes.
She looked
No,
older than I remembered.
You don't know that.
I had met her
Elaine.
many times.
Maybe that's
but
why
I had
she
never
made me the
really
responsible
seen her.
one.
That night, I
Stop.
noticed everything.
Maybe she was
the
trying
way
to
she
make
held
up for
herself.
something.
The tension
Stop.
around her
Maybe
eyes.
I was
the way
never
her
really.
hands trembled.
Stop. She
The
sat
word
down.
came out louder
Elaine
than I
placed
intended.
the letter on the
Elaine
table.
froze.
Susan
I
looked
walked
at it
toward her.
Then she
Don't
closed
do
her
this.
eyes.
What?
I knew this day
Don't
would
turn
come.
this into another
Why?
reason to
Because
hate
your
yourself.
mother couldn't carry
She
it
stared
forever.
at me.
How
She's
can I
dead.
not?
I
Because
know.
this
Then
isn't
why
about
didn't
your
she
blood.
tell us while she was
Then
alive?
what is it about?
Susan looked
It's about
at me.
the fact that
because
you were
she
loved.
was ashamed.
She
Of
shook her
what?
head.
Of what
You
she
don't
did.
know that.
Elaine's
I
voice
do.
broke.
How?
What did she
Because
do?
I've spent my
Susan
entire
took a
life
deep
watching
breath.
you.
My mother
She
was
looked at me.
Margaret.
You
Silence.
were loved.
The truth
But
was
maybe
finally
not by
spoken
Dad.
aloud.
He loved
Elaine
you.
stared
You
at
can't
her.
know that.
You are Margaret's
can.
daughter.
How?
Yes.
I held up
and
the
Mom
letter.
knew.
Because
Yes.
I read what he
Your
wrote.
whole life.
Elaine looked
Yes.
at the letter.
I felt
He
sick.
wrote to me.
How?
He wrote
Susan
to you too.
looked at me.
Her face
Your
changed.
mother and my
What?
mother were sisters.
I froze.
What
I already
did you
knew.
say? But
I said
hearing
he
it
wrote
from
to
her
you.
made it real.
Where?
Then
In the
why
box.
did Mom hide you?
What box?
Susan's eyes
The
filled
one
with
Mom
tears.
left.
Because
I realized
I was
something.
the child she had
There was
promised
another
to protect.
envelope.
What
The
does
one
that
addressed
mean?
to Elaine.
Susan
I had
looked
forgotten
at the
it.
letter. It
Your
was
mother
still
believed
in the box.
she had failed
I
my
ran
mother.
to my bag.
I waited.
I pulled it out.
Margaret died
Elaine
angry.
stared at it.
At
Her
Patricia.
name was written
Yes.
across the front.
Why?
I handed
Because
it to
Patricia
her.
had
Open
promised
it to help her.
She couldn't
and
move.
didn't.
Elaine
She did. Her hands
Susan
shook
looked
down.
She
But
opened
not
the envelope.
enough.
That
Inside
sentence
was a
stayed
letter
with me.
from
Not
our
enough.
father.
How
The
many
first
family
line read,
tragedies were built
"My
on those
daughter."
3 words?
Elaine began
Not
crying
enough
before
love.
she even finished
Not
reading
enough
it.
courage.
I watched
Not
her.
enough
The
honesty.
woman who had spent
Not
her life
enough
trying
time.
to be strong.
Susan
The woman who had
continued.
believed she
After
had
my
to
mother
earn love
died,
through
Patricia
responsibility.
found me.
The woman who had
When?
just learned
When
that the
I
man
was
she called father
27.
might not have been her
Elaine
biological
stared.
father.
She knew
And yet,
where you
there
were.
it was.
Yes.
A letter.
Why
His
didn't she tell
handwriting.
us?
His
Because
words.
I asked her
His
not
love.
to.
I was
She read
stunned.
aloud. Why?
I don't know
Because
if I will
didn't
ever have
want
the
to
courage
destroy
to tell
her
you the
family.
truth.
But
I
I
want you
almost
to know
laughed.
something.
Destroy
A father
her family
is not defined by
Susan
blood.
looked at me.
A father
You
is
don't
defined by the years
understand.
he chooses
Then
to stay.
explain.
I chose
She
you.
nodded.
Every day.
Your mother believed
you
that
were
if
my
she
daughter
told your
before
father
you were
he would
born.
leave.
You were my
Why?
daughter when I held
Because
you.
your father
You were
knew
my
my
daughter
father.
when you
I
disappointed
felt the
me.
old pieces
You were my
shifting.
daughter when you
Your
made
father
me proud.
had business with
You will
my
be my
father.
daughter long
Elaine
after
said,
I am gone.
Daniel,
Never let
Susan
anyone tell you
nodded.
otherwise.
Yes.
Elaine
I looked
collapsed
at Elaine.
into the chair.
The connections
I
were
sat
becoming
beside her.
impossible
For
to
several
ignore.
minutes, my
Neither
father
of us spoke.
Daniel. Then she
Margaret.
looked at me.
Susan,
Why didn't
my
Mom
mother.
give me this? All these lives
I
had crossed
didn't know.
long before Elaine
Then I
and I were
remembered her
born.
letter.
And yet
The
we had
sentence
grown
about
up believing
fear.
our family
I looked
history
at
was
Susan.
simple.
Did
It had
Mom
never
know
been
about
simple.
this letter?
We had
Susan
simply
nodded.
been children.
Yes.
Susan
Why?
reached into her
Because
purse.
your father
She
gave
removed
it to
a
her.
photograph.
Before he
She
died.
placed it on
Yes.
the table.
Why?
I recognized
Because
my
he
father.
wanted her to give it
He
to
was
Elaine
standing
when she
beside
was ready.
a younger woman. I
Margaret.
looked at Elaine, and beside
Maybe
them
she
was
thought
a little
this was
girl.
the right time.
Susan. Elaine
I stared
cried.
at the photograph.
Why is everything
When
always
was
the
this
right
taken?
time after everyone is dead?
1968.
I didn't
Why
have an
was my
answer,
father there?
so I did the
Susan
only thing
looked
I
at
could.
me. I held
Because
her,
he knew Margaret,
and this time
How?
she let me.
She worked
The next
for
morning,
his company.
Elaine called me.
I froze.
I want a DNA
My father
test.
had known Margaret.
I wasn't
before
surprised.
he met my
Okay.
mother. Before I
Will
was
you
born.
do it with me?
Before Elaine
Yes.
was even an adult.
Why?
Because
the family
you
history
shouldn't have
I
to
thought
do
I
this
understood
alone.
was suddenly
She
a maze.
was quiet.
Did my
Thank
mother
you.
know?
Of
Eventually.
course. The test
How?
was done
Your
privately.
father told her.
Then we waited.
After
The waiting
they were
was
married.
unbearable.
Why?
During those
Because
weeks,
he wanted
Elaine
to be
became
honest.
distant. Elaine
Not from me.
whispered. From
Then why
everyone.
did Mom hide
She stopped everything. Answering calls. Susan looked at her. She stopped going to work.
Because your father wasn't only telling her about
Margaret. I understood.
I looked at Susan.
The truth had become too heavy.
She
then
hesitated.
One night, she came to my apartment. She looked exhausted. He had promised Margaret I got the results. What? I stood protect her daughter. What did they say? I stared. She held the envelope. Susan shook her head. Opened it. No. Why? She looked because at Elaine. Once I do, I can't pretend the room anymore. Went silent. I understood. Elaine looked completely confused. Do you want confused. Me to open it? Why would my father promise then to protect you? Then what do you want? Because he believed your father was responsible for what happened to my mother. Me. So I did. I felt my chest tighten. We opened the envelope what together. Happened? The result Susan was looked clear. At the floor. Richard Whitmore was not Elaine's biological father. On what? For a long time, a financial we sat deal. In silence. I thought then of Daniel. Elaine whispered, the business. I feel like my Susan entire nodded. Life just disappeared. My mother discovered that someone was stealing hand. Money. Your life didn't disappear. She never knew. My father then wasn't what my father. She was blamed. Not for biologically. Yes, that's not the only way to be someone's father. Who blamed her? She looked Susan at me. Looked at me. Why do you always know what to say? I couldn't breathe. I don't. Elaine stood up. Yes, you do. That's impossible. No. I Susan smiled. Didn't sadly. Answer. I just know what I needed someone to say stealing from the company. She looked down. Yes, Clara. Why? Yes. Because the evidence. Did you ever hate me? Was the question guilty? Surprised me. No. Of then course. Who was? She looked Susan at me. Looked at me. Really? Daniel. Yes. I felt Why? The room go because silent. I thought you Daniel, had everything. The man we had believed bitterly. Was my father's friend. I thought you had the man everything. Whose son had given us the letter. I thought you the could man say who whatever you wanted helped my father. I thought you could do whatever you wanted. That doesn't make sense. I thought Mom loved you more. Susan continued. I thought she loved Daniel you more. Was stealing we from the company. At each other. And suddenly didn't Dad we started laughing. He did. Not because I shook my funny. Head. Because no, it was your absurd. Father discovered two it. Sisters. Then why two blame Margaret? Two completely because Daniel opposite threatened beliefs. Him. Both with convinced what? The other Susan had received more love. Your father maybe that had was the greatest lie our family had I felt ever my created. Stomach drop. There had never what? Been enough love. Susan in the way shook we her head. So we each assumed the other had received how do you know what we were missing. This? The because man who had been my father's biological father was named before Robert. She died. We eventually found him. She tell anyone? He was living in another state. She was afraid. He was 86. Of Daniel. Elaine Susan didn't know whether she wanted to meet money. 4 months. She refused. Influence. Then one day she changed her mind. I Susan need to see at Elaine. I asked. Your father wasn't afraid because Daniel I need to know what he looks like. Then what? He was afraid Daniel would hurt you. She took a breath. The room went cold. I need to know what whether I feel mean? Anything. Daniel knew about your family. Robert lived everyone in a small knew house. About our family. When he opened the door, not like Elaine this. Froze. Susan he leaned at forward. Then Daniel knew your crying. Father had 2 daughters like her. I stared Elaine at her. Didn't move. Why would like that matter? Because mother. One of those daughters was not his. I couldn't speak. Elaine stared at Susan. What are you saying? Susan looked at me. Then, at Elaine. Elaine's face changed. I don't think you know who my mother is. I do. How? Robert looked at me. Then back at Elaine. I knew Patricia. The old feeling returned. Another connection. Another secret. Another piece of the past. Robert invited us inside. He told us the truth. He had known Patricia before she married Richard. He had been in love with her. But he had left. Not because he didn't love her. Because he was afraid. He had been young. Immature. He had believed he could return later. He never did. Richard had stepped into his place. And when Patricia became pregnant, Robert had never known. Until decades later. By then, it was too late. Elaine listened. She didn't forgive him. Not that day. Maybe she never would. But she asked questions. That was enough. Before we left, Robert gave her something. A small watch. I bought this for your father, he said. My father. Richard. Why? Because he knew the truth. Elaine stared at him. How long did he know? Your entire life. I looked at her. Why did he stay? Robert smiled sadly. Because he loved you. That was the answer. The simplest answer. The one that mattered most. After meeting Robert, Elaine changed. She stopped asking who her real father was. She began asking a better question. Who had been her father? The answer was Richard. Not because of blood. Because of choice. Because he had stayed. Because he had raised her. Because he had loved her. Because when he had every reason to walk away, he hadn't. And suddenly, the man she had spent her whole life mourning became even more real. Not perfect. Not biological. But hers. 1 year later, Elaine and I returned to the cemetery. We stood beside our father's grave. Elaine held the watch Robert had given her. She placed it on the stone. Then she said, "I know now." I looked at her. "What? Why Dad loved me differently? What do you mean?" "He knew I wasn't his." I shook my head. "No, Clara. He loved you. I know. He didn't love you differently." Elaine smiled. "You're right." She looked down. "He loved me deliberately." That sentence broke something open inside me. Deliberately. Not accidentally. Not because of blood. Because he chose her. Every day. We stood there together. And for the first time, I wasn't angry at my father for leaving. I was grateful for the years he had stayed. The family secrets continued to surface for years. Some were important. Some were meaningless. We learned that my mother had once wanted to become a teacher. We learned that my father had been an excellent cook. We learned that Elaine had been terrified of dogs as a child. We learned that I had once bitten my sister's arm because she wouldn't give me a cookie. That last one became a family joke. Every story added another piece. And slowly, the people we had believed were larger than life became human. My mother. My father. Margaret. Daniel. Robert. All of them had made mistakes. All of them had been afraid. All of them had loved someone. And all of them had failed someone. Maybe that's what families are. Not perfect people. Just people trying to love each other while carrying their own wounds. Sometimes they succeed. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes it takes the next generation to understand what the previous one couldn't. Years later, Elaine asked me something. "Do you think Mom knew we'd find everything?" I laughed. "Honestly, yes. Absolutely." "Why?" "Because she was incapable of leaving a mystery alone." Elaine smiled. "That's true. She probably planned the entire thing." "You think so?" "I wouldn't be surprised if she was somewhere laughing at us." Elaine looked at the sky. "Mom, if you're listening, you could have made this much easier." The wind moved through the trees. I laughed. Then Elaine became quiet. "Clara." "Yes. Do you think she was proud of us?" I looked at my sister. The question was simple. The answer wasn't. "Yes." "How do you know?" "Because she finally told the truth." Elaine smiled. "That's not an answer." "It is." "How?" "Because telling the truth was the hardest thing she ever did." Elaine nodded. "You're right." We stood together. And I thought about the woman my mother had been. She had been afraid. She had been controlling. She had made terrible mistakes. She had hurt her daughters. But she had also loved us. And at the end, she had given us something neither of us had known how to give ourselves. The truth. My relationship with Elaine became something I never expected. We became friends. Not just sisters. Friends. We traveled together. We celebrated birthdays. We sat beside each other during difficult times. When Elaine lost her husband, I was there. When I lost my closest friend, Elaine was there. We learned how to show up without fixing. That was important. Elaine learned that sometimes I didn't need solutions. I needed someone to sit beside me. I learned that sometimes she didn't need reassurance. She needed permission to fall apart. We became fluent in each other's silence. And that was something we had never known as children. One Christmas, Elaine gave me a gift. It was wrapped badly. I laughed when I saw it. You still can't wrap presents. Don't start. I opened it. Inside was the photograph. The original. The one of us as children. I stared at it. Where did you get this? I asked for it. From whom? Mom's friend. Why? Because I wanted you to have it. I looked at the photograph. Elaine was holding my hand. I was 6. She was 20. Neither of us knew what was coming. Our father would die. Our mother would make mistakes. We would grow apart. We would spend decades believing the wrong things about each other. And then, somehow, we would find our way back. I looked at Elaine. Thank you. She smiled. For what? For holding my hand. She laughed. I was probably trying to stop you from running away. Maybe. Maybe nothing. I held the photograph. Then I said, I think you saved me that day. Elaine's expression changed. Clara, I mean it. She shook her head. You were 6. Exactly. We laughed. Then she hugged me. And I realized that the photograph had become more than a memory. It was proof. Proof that the story could change. Proof that people could love each other even when they didn't know how to say it. Proof that sometimes the truth isn't hidden in the words people speak. Sometimes it's hidden in what they do. A hand held. A door left open. A person who stays. I have spent years thinking about the word family. I used to believe family meant people who knew everything about you. Now I think it means something else. Maybe you're also loyal. Not necessarily maybe you're all of those things at once. It is people are willing to learn it again. You don't have to reduce yourself to one word because someone else couldn't understand the whole of you. Parents and if you've ever been the person who was expected to be strong all the time, strangers become friends. Strength does not mean never needing if you're lucky. The people you thought you had lost are still there when you do. Waiting. Elaine spent for decades to becoming someone else. I spent for you to finally see the opposite. That is what happened to Elaine and somewhere in the middle. We stopped trying to become the sisters our mother wanted. The last time I saw my mother in a dream, we were sitting at the old kitchen table. She was younger. I was younger. Strong. Elaine was there sensitive. My father walked into the room. Everyone was laughing. All of it. No one was afraid. There was one final thing my mother had left hiding anything. I discovered it years later. But I wasn't sad. Not I think a video. I finally understood her voice. What my mind was she trying had made to tell me. Shortly before she died. Need to change the file was on an old device that had been stored with her control the present. I almost my parents had made their choices. I pressed play. My mother her had voice made filled the room. My father had made his. But Margaret unmistakably had made hers. Clara had made his. If you're listening to this, and I had then you inherited all of it. I suppose I should apologize for destiny. We could choose through my tears. We did. My mother continued, and that I know I made your lives more complicated years than they ago. Needed to be. I thought my family had taken something from me. I know I taught you to misunderstand each other. My confidence. I cannot change my sense of belonging. But I want you to know something. But the greatest mistake I made was believing that love could protect people from the ability to question. It cannot. The courage without notice. Honesty becomes the strength to survive. Fear becomes control. And control becomes the wisdom to understand, and distance becomes resentment without you becoming wrong about yourself. I should have told you everything. That is the truth. I should have trusted you. Known at 6. I didn't. At 16. I'm sorry. But if you are listening to this together, at 46, then perhaps you have done something. Maybe I wasn't ready. Perhaps you have maybe broken I needed pattern. Every mistake. That is all I ever wanted. Argument, not a every perfect silence. Family. Every just a family that could tell every the letter. Truth. Every painful ended. Discovery. I sat to alone become in my living room who could finally understand. 3 times. And maybe that's then what my mother meant Elaine. When she wrote. She answered, when you are ready. What's wrong? Not ready to forgive her. Then why are you to forget? Because ready I to see Mom. Ready to what? Understand. Another recording. Ready to choose something silence. Different. Then today, Elaine if someone said, asks me about my family, I don't tell them we were complicated. She listened. I tell then them we were human. Back. That's neither a better word. Spoke for a long time.
We
Finally,
loved each other.
Elaine said.
We hurt each other.
She sounds tired.
We misunderstood
Yes.
each other.
I miss her.
We lost each
I
other.
know.
And
Even
somehow,
after
we
everything.
found each other again.
Me too.
Not because
Then she
the past
said,
changed.
Maybe that's
because
okay.
we did.
I
My sister
smiled.
and I cannot
Yes.
get back the years
Maybe
we lost.
it was.
But we
Maybe
can
we
make
don't
the
have to
years
choose
ahead between
different.
loving someone
We can
and acknowledging
choose
the harm
honesty.
they caused.
We can choose
Maybe
patience.
both can exist.
We can choose
Maybe
to
that's
act
what
before
growing
assuming.
up really means.
We can choose to
understanding
listen before
that
judging.
the people who hurt
We can
you
choose
can
to
also
stay.
be the people you
And
love.
every time we
and
do,
that love
we prove
does
that
not
our family
erase the
story
hurt.
is no longer
But the
being
hurt
written
does
by
not
fear.
have to erase
It is
the
being
love
written
either.
by us.
If there is one
That is
lesson
the final
I have
gift
carried
my
from
mother
everything
gave
that
us.
happened,
Not
it
the
is
house.
this.
Not
Never
the
let
money.
someone else tell you
Not
who
the
you are
secrets.
without
The
questioning
choice.
the story. The
Not
choice to
because
decide
every
what
story
happens
is
next.
a lie.
And
But
that is
because
the choice
every
I hope
story
every
is
person
incomplete.
listening to this story
My mother
remembers.
saw one
You may
version
not
of me.
be able to
My
change
sister
what your
saw
family
another.
did. You
My
may not
father
be able
saw
to recover
another.
the years you
I
lost.
saw another.
You may
And
not
for
be able
years,
to force
I thought
someone
one
to
of us had to
understand
be
you.
right.
But you
Now
can
I
decide
know.
what you
We
carry
were all
forward.
looking at
You
different
can decide
pieces.
which
The
patterns
truth
end
was
with you.
always
You
bigger.
can decide
I
which
wasn't
truths
the
finally
difficult
get
daughter.
spoken.
I
And you can
wasn't the
decide
fragile
who you become
daughter.
after the
I
story
wasn't
changes.
the family problem.
For me, I
That
was a
person
human being
is
trying
Clara,
to survive a
not
family
the
that didn't
difficult
know how
daughter.
to talk about pain.
Not the emotional
Elaine
one.
wasn't the perfect
Not the
daughter.
fragile one.
She wasn't
Not
the strong
the family
one who
problem.
never needed
Just
anyone.
Clara.
She was a
And for
woman
the first
who had
time
been
in my
praised
life,
for
I
carrying
don't
burdens
need anyone
until she
else to
forgot
tell
she
me
was
who that
allowed to
is.
put them down.
I already
My
know.
mother wasn't
I
a
am
monster.
the woman who survived
She was a
the
frightened
story.
woman who confused
I am the sister
control
who
with
found
protection.
her way home.
My father
I am the
wasn't
daughter
a
who
perfect
finally
hero.
learned that love
He was
and
a flawed
truth
man
can
who
exist
made
together.
mistakes but
And
chose
I am
to
the
stay
person
when
who
it finally
finally
understands
and
that
our family
sometimes
wasn't broken
the family
because
you were
we
born
lacked
into
love.
is not the
We
family
were
you were
broken
meant to
because
remain
we
trapped
lacked
inside.
honesty.
Sometimes
Once we understood
you have to
that,
rebuild it.
everything changed.
One honest conversation
not immediately,
at a time.
not
One
magically,
apology at a
but
time.
permanently.
One difficult
Today,
truth
Elaine
at a time.
and I have our
One
own
hand
tradition.
reaching
Every
across
year,
the distance.
on the anniversary of
One
our mother's
person
death,
saying,
we write
"I
each other
see
a
you,"
letter,
and another
not about
answering,
her. Now
about
I
us.
see you too.
We tell each other
That is
something
where
we
healing
haven't said.
begins.
That is
Something we're
where our
afraid of.
story truly
Something
began.
we're grateful
And perhaps,
for.
after
Something
everything
we
we
regret.
lost, that is
Something
enough.
we hope for.
More than enough.
We don't keep the
because in
letters.
the end,
We
my
read
mother's
them
greatest
together.
secret was
Then
never the
we
secret
burn them.
about my father.
Not because the
It
words
wasn't
don't
Margaret.
matter.
It
Because
wasn't
they do.
Daniel.
We
It
burn
wasn't
them because
the
the
hidden
truth
letters
has
or the
already
forgotten
been
photographs.
spoken.
It
Her
doesn't
greatest
need to
secret
become
was the
another
one she
family
carried
secret.
about herself.
Last year,
She had
I
spent
wrote,
her whole life
I am
believing that if
grateful
she
that
could
you
control
finally saw
every
me,
truth,
she could
Elaine
prevent
wrote,
everyone she loved
I
from
am
being
grateful
hurt.
that you stayed
But
long
she
enough
was
for
wrong.
me to learn how.
The truth hurts.
We cried.
Secrets hurt
Then
more.
we laughed.
And sometimes
Then we
the only
burned
way
the
to
letters
save a family
and
is to
watched
stop
the smoke
protecting it from
disappear
reality.
into the night.
My mother
Sometimes
finally
I wonder
understood
what would
that.
have happened if
She
my mother
waited
had
too
told us the
long,
truth
but
30
she
years
understood.
Would
And
Elaine
because she
and
did,
I have been
Elaine and
closer?
I were given
Would
one
we have
final
avoided
chance,
years of
not
resentment?
to become the sisters
Would my mother
we might
have lived
been,
longer?
but to
Would my
become
father
the
have
sisters
made
we could
different
still
choices?
Be. That is
Would
the
Margaret
difference
have
between
forgiven
regret
her?
and hope.
Would Daniel have
Regret
been exposed
looks
sooner?
backward.
There
Hope
are no
looks forward.
answers.
And today,
I have learned
when I think
not
of my
to
mother,
live inside
I no longer
questions
think
that
only
cannot
about
be
the
answered.
secrets she kept.
The past
I
is
think
a place
about the
we can
truth
visit.
she finally
It
gave
is not
us.
a place we
When
can
I think
live.
of my father,
So
I no
visit
longer
sometimes.
think only about the night
I remember.
he died.
I
think about
understand.
every day he
Then
chose
I come
to stay.
home.
When I
Because
think
that
of Elaine,
is where
I
I
no
belong
longer
now.
see the sister
Not
who
in the
misunderstood
old
me.
house.
I see
Not
the woman
in the
who
old
learned
story.
how to listen.
Here.
And when
In
I
the
think
life
of myself,
I built.
I no longer
in the
see the girl
relationships
everyone
I chose.
called difficult.
In the truth,
I see someone
finally
who is
learned to
always
tell myself.
trying to tell the truth.
My mother once wrote
She just
that I
needed
noticed
someone
other
willing
people
to hear
ignored.
it. Now,
For years,
finally, I
someone
thought that
did.
made me difficult.
My sister.
Now I
And
think
that
it
changed
made me brave.
everything.
Because noticing is the beginning of change. You cannot change what you refuse to see. You cannot heal what you refuse to name. And you cannot repair a relationship built on lies without first
just telling the truth. That is what Elaine and I learned. We didn't repair our relationship by pretending our childhood hadn't happened. We repaired it by finally admitting that it had. We admitted that we had hurt each other. We admitted that we had been hurt by others. We admitted that we had misunderstood each other. And then we chose to stay. That was the miracle. Not the letter. Not the journal. Not the secrets. The staying. Because anyone can love someone when things are easy. But staying when the truth becomes uncomfortable? That is a different kind of love. That is the kind of love that changes families. If you have ever been the person in your family who is called too emotional, too difficult, too sensitive, too stubborn, remember this. Maybe you are. I used to believe family meant people who knew everything about you. Now I think it means something else. Maybe you're family also is loyal. Not necessarily maybe the you're all of those things history. At once. It is people the people are willing to learn it again. You don't have to reduce yourself to one word because someone else couldn't understand the whole of you. Parents and if you've ever been the person who was expected to be strong all the time, strangers become friends. Strength does not mean sometimes never needing if you're lucky. The people you thought you had lost are still there when you do. Waiting. Elaine spent for decades to becoming someone else. I spent for you to finally see the opposite. That is what happened to Elaine. We met somewhere in the middle. We stopped trying to become the sisters our mother wanted. The last time I saw my mother in a dream, we were sitting at the old kitchen table. She was younger. I was younger. Strong. Elaine was there sensitive. My father walked into the room. Everyone was laughing. All of it. No one was one final thing my mother had left hiding anything. I discovered it years later. But I wasn't sad. Not I think a video. I finally understood her voice. What my mind was she trying had made to tell it me. Shortly before she died. Need to change the file was on an old device that had been stored with her control the present. I almost my deleted had made their choices. I pressed play. My mother her had voice made filled the room. My father had made his, but Margaret unmistakably had made hers. Clara had made Elaine. His. If you're listening Elaine to this, and I had then you inherited all of it. I suppose I should apologize for destiny. That. We could choose through my tears. We did. My mother continued, and that I know I made your lives more complicated years than they ago. Needed to be. I thought my family had taken something from me. I know I taught you to misunderstand each other. My confidence. I cannot change my sense of belonging. But I want you to know something. But the greatest mistake I made was believing that love could protect people from the ability to question. It cannot. The courage without honesty becomes the strength to survive. Fear becomes control. And control becomes the wisdom to understand, and distance becomes resentment without you becoming wrong about yourself. I should have told you everything. That is the truth. I should have trusted you. Known at 6. I didn't. At 16. I'm sorry. But if you are listening to this together, at 46, then perhaps you have done something. Maybe I wasn't ready. Perhaps you have broken I needed pattern. Every mistake. That is all I ever wanted. Argument, not a perfect family. Every just a family that could tell the truth. Every painful ended. Discovery. I sat to alone become in my living room who could finally listen to it 3 times. And maybe that's then what my mother meant Elaine. When she wrote. She answered, when you are ready. What's wrong? Not ready to forgive her. Then why are you to forget? Because ready I to found see. Mom. Ready to what? Understand. Another recording. Ready to choose something silence. Different. Then today, Elaine if someone said, asks me about my family, I don't tell them we were complicated. She listened. I tell then them she we were human. Back. That's neither a better of us word. Spoke for a long human. Time. We finally loved each other. Elaine said. We hurt each other. She sounds tired. We misunderstood each other. I miss her. We lost each other. Know. And even somehow after we found each other again. Me too. Not because then she the past said, changed. Maybe that's because okay. We did. My sister and I cannot get back the years maybe we lost. It was, but we maybe can make we don't the have years to choose between different. Loving someone we can and acknowledging the harm they caused. We can choose maybe patience can exist. We can choose maybe to that's what growing up really means. We can choose to understanding before that judging. People who hurt we can choose to stay be the people you and love. Every time we do that, love we prove that our family story is no longer being written by fear. Does not have to erase the love written by us. If there is one lesson I have carried my mother everything that happened, not the house. Never let someone else tell you who you are without questioning the story. The choice to decide every story is a lie. And that is the choice I hope every person listening to this story remembers. My mother saw one version of me. You may not be able to change my sister what your family another. You may not be able to recover the years you lost. Saw another. You may not be able to force someone to understand you right. But you can decide what you carry forward. We were all looking at different pieces. You can decide which patterns the truth end with you. Always bigger. You can decide which truths finally get spoken. And you can decide who you become after the story changes. The family problem. For me, I was a human being trying
Clara,
to survive a
not
family
the
that didn't
difficult
know how to
daughter,
talk about pain.
not the emotional
Elaine
one,
wasn't the perfect
not the
daughter.
fragile one.
She wasn't
Not
the strong
the family
one who
problem.
never needed
Just
anyone.
Clara.
She was a
And for
woman
the first
who had
time
been
in my
praised
life,
for
I
carrying
don't
burdens
need anyone
until she
else to
forgot
tell
she
me
was
who that
allowed to
is.
put them down.
I already
My
know.
mother wasn't
I
a
am
monster.
the woman who survived
She was a
the
frightened
story.
woman who confused
I am the sister
control
who
with
found
protection.
her way home.
My father
I am the
wasn't
daughter
a
who
perfect
finally
hero.
learned that love
He was
and
a flawed
truth
man
can
who
exist
made
together.
mistakes but
And
chose
I am
to
the
stay
person
when
who
it mattered.
finally understands
And
that
our family
sometimes
wasn't broken
the family
because
you were
we
born
lacked
into
love.
is not the
We
family
were
you were
broken
meant to
because we
remain trapped
lacked
inside.
honesty.
Sometimes
Once we understood
you have to
that,
rebuild it.
everything changed.
One honest conversation
not immediately,
at a time.
not
One
magically,
apology at a
but
time.
permanently.
One difficult
Today,
truth
Elaine
at a time.
and I have our
One
own
hand
tradition
reaching
every
across
year
the distance.
on the anniversary of
One
our mother's
person
death,
saying,
we write
"I
each other
see
a
you,"
letter, and another
not about
answering
her.
Now
About
I
us.
see you too.
We tell each other
that is
something
where
we
healing
haven't said.
begins.
Something
That is
we're
where
afraid
our
of.
story truly
Something
began.
we're grateful
and perhaps
for.
after
Something
everything
we
we
regret.
lost, that is
Something
enough.
we hope for.
More than enough.
We don't keep the
because
letters.
in the end,
We
my
read
mother's
them
greatest
together.
secret was
Then
never the
we
secret
burn them.
about my father.
Not because the
it
words
wasn't
don't
Margaret.
matter.
It
Because
wasn't
they do.
Daniel.
We burn
It wasn't
them
the
because
hidden
the
letters
truth has
or the
already
forgotten
been
photographs.
spoken.
It
Her
doesn't
greatest
need to
secret
become
was the
another
one she
family
carried
secret.
about herself.
Last year,
She had
I
spent
wrote,
her whole life
I am
believing that if
grateful
she
that
could
you
control
finally saw
every
me.
truth, she could
Elaine
prevent
wrote,
everyone she loved
I
from
am
being
grateful
hurt.
that you stayed
But
long
she
enough
was
for
wrong.
me to learn how.
The truth hurts.
We cried.
Secrets hurt
then
more.
we laughed.
And sometimes
Then we
the only
burned
way
the
to
letters
save a family
and
is to
watched
stop
the smoke
protecting it from
disappear
reality.
into the night.
My mother
Sometimes
finally
I wonder what
understood
would have
that.
happened if
She
my mother
waited
had told
too
us the
long,
truth
but
30
she
years
understood.
Would
And
Elaine
because she
and
did,
I have been
Elaine
closer?
and I were given
Would
one
we have
final
avoided
chance,
years of
not
resentment?
to become the sisters
Would my
we
mother
might
have lived
been,
longer?
but to
Would my
become
father
the
have
sisters
made
we could
different
still
choices?
Be. That is
Would
the
Margaret
difference
have
between
forgiven
regret
her?
and hope.
Would Daniel have
Regret
been exposed
looks
sooner?
backward. There
Hope
are no
looks forward.
answers.
And
And
today,
I have learned
when I think
not
of my
to
mother,
live inside
I no longer
questions
think
that
only
cannot
about
be
the
answered.
secrets she kept.
The past
I
is
think
a place
about the
we can
truth
visit.
she finally
It
gave
is not
us.
a place we
When I
can
think
live.
of my father,
So
I no
visit
longer think
sometimes.
only about the night
I
he
remember.
died.
I
I think about
understand.
every day he
Then
chose
I come
to stay.
home.
When I
Because
think
that
of Elaine,
is where
I
I
no
belong
longer
now.
see the sister
Not
who
in the
misunderstood
old
me.
house.
I see
Not
the woman
in the
who
old
learned
story.
how to listen.
Here.
And when
In
I
the
think of
life
myself,
I built.
I no longer
in the
see the girl
relationships
everyone
I chose.
called difficult.
In the truth,
I see someone
finally
who was
learned to tell
always
myself.
trying to tell the truth.
My mother once wrote
she
that
just
I
needed
noticed
someone
things other
willing
people
to hear
ignored.
it.
Now,
For years,
finally,
I
someone
thought that
did.
made me difficult.
My sister.
Now I
And
think
that
it
changed
made me brave.
everything.
Because noticing is the beginning of change. You cannot change what you refuse to see. You cannot heal what you refuse to name. And you cannot repair a relationship built on lies without first telling the truth. That is what Elaine and I learned. We didn't repair our relationship by pretending our childhood hadn't happened. We repaired it by finally admitting that it had. We admitted that we had hurt each other. We admitted that we had been hurt by others. We admitted that we had misunderstood each other. And then we chose to stay. That was the miracle. Not the letter. Not the journal. Not the secrets. The staying. Because anyone can love someone when things are easy. But staying when the truth becomes uncomfortable? That is a different kind of love. That is the kind of love that changes families. If you have ever been the person in your family who was called too emotional, too difficult, too sensitive, too stubborn, remember this. Maybe you are.